What up, everybody? Welcome to a Monday morning here at Coffee Hour. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host. Thanks for joining me on Coffee Hour, starting a new week. Hopefully, everybody had a wonderful weekend, got what you need to get done. I didn't do squat. I guess that's okay. Though I feel very non-productive, but didn't do squat. Since moving back to Virginia, it was my first weekend with some Chesapeake Bay crabs. Okay, so I have pretty much downed almost 5 dozen since Friday afternoon. Okay, getting my fill. I figure, you know what? I don't get them that often, so you know what? I'll eat them until I'm sick of them, and then it'll be sparingly throughout the summer, that type of thing. Boy, have you seen the price of crabs lately? Wow. Anyway, thanks for joining me, folks, and spending your morning with me here at Coffee Hour. Hopefully you did have a great weekend and got some stuff done, unlike me. As always, I like to live vicariously through everybody that joins us here for the show. Again, I get emails all the time with people that are making comments and saying different things and are appreciative of the show. So love to hear from you, where you're from, what you got going on. If you have a test that you're getting ready to take or something like that. So I'd love to hear it. So in the chat, the only one that doesn't work with is obviously Instagram, but I do see your questions over there. If you do have them over on Instagram, I do see them, but they don't seem to make it here. So it just seems like for some reason, EV Mux hasn't figured out how to bring in Instagram, but that's okay because they still haven't figured out how to do TikTok either, which is a good thing because I'm not a big TikTok fan. So, all right, let's go on and get into some shout outs really quickly this morning because we need to get into part 3 of our swimming pools. We're going to finish off talking about the wiring that goes to the various niches, wet niche, dry niche, no niche. Finish that off quickly, the wiring method. Again, 30,000 foot view. If you want a real detailed review of swimming pools, spas, and hot tubs, then you need to go watch our video. It's an 8-part series over on Fast Tracks Tube. It's available if you're an annual subscriber or if you're anybody that has the enhanced program over at fasttracksystem.com. You get access to that too over on Fast Tracks Tube, or you might have won it here in a giveaway, that type of thing. Speaking of which, we are sponsored by the Trade Hog. So again, feed the hog. Nika's question of the day that came out Friday, I disagree with their question of the day. I disagree with their answer. So I did send my thoughts to them. So it'll be funny to see if they say, Paul, you're wrong. And I might be wrong. It's just the way I see it. So it's okay to be wrong as long as you challenge the status quo. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. I don't think that at any time I'm ever the means to be all for anything. You should always do your own research, and you can have your own opinions. You can agree to disagree, and that's fine. In no way do I think that my view is the only view on something. If you want to look at something a different way, that's probably fine. You just have to work that out with your AHJ. I'm only giving you interpretations and certain things that I know based on time and working with it, but you may have a different experience in your jurisdiction. Okay, so again, that's a unique thing about the NEC. Some things are pretty easy. They're black and white. We don't have to worry. And some things can be left up to interpretation. And again, your AHJ may not agree, and that's okay. And you could be 100% right, and they could be 100% wrong, but they could say, well, I see it differently. And they're the authority having jurisdiction, that type of thing. Okay. All right. Let's do some shout outs real quick. What's up, Paul? Glad to have you in the house, as always. Adam, glad to have you in here. Okay. You had a great weekend. I did as well. Didn't do anything, but I had a great weekend eating crabs. What's up, David, down in Florida? Thanks for joining, David. Glad to have you here. Adam, there you go. Coffee's flowing. I do have coffee this morning, so I only had 1 cup, so I haven't switched over to the Diet Pepsi. So I do have that. Skyattle or Skiattle, good morning. Glad to have you here. Jonathan, I am doing well, my friend. Glad to have you here. Hopefully you're doing well as also. What's up, Santana? Following over on the YouTube channel. YouTube, Master the NEC, our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining. Let's see, Marlon, good morning. Glad to have you here. Shouting out to all the code nerds that are in the house. What's up, Brandon? Glad to have you here as well. Welcome to the show this morning. Let's see here. Geared towards commercial. Let's see here. Whenever you get the time, sir, is the TradeDog geared towards commercial industrial applications? No. It's just geared to the National Electrical Code. Residential, commercial, service. It works fine for plumbing, mechanical, building. It's constantly learning. So, but no, it wasn't geared specifically to commercial or industrial applications. No. Let's see here. Says, I didn't do anything. I've been sick with the flu since Tuesday. You must have given it to me, man, because I woke up last night before I went to bed. Every part of my body was aching for some reason. It ain't because I worked hard. I don't know what it was. It's like everything. I got this nagging thing where my shoulder hurt. This shoulder over here hurt for almost a year. I couldn't hardly lift it. And then it just worked all the way up from my elbow up. And I went to the doctor. He said it was a frozen shoulder. I was like, okay. Eventually it cleared up. Well, guess what? Yeah, it's moved over to this shoulder and arm. And the bicep feels like it's just ripping apart sometimes. The only way to make it feel better is to really push in on it, and it stops the pain. I don't know what's going on. But now this shoulder and arm is in pain, so I can't sleep on that side. I don't know. It's kind of just moved across the body. Maybe it's sending me some kind of signal. I should probably go get it checked out, but I'm in the middle of the country here now, and I'm just too lazy to do it. So I'll get by. I'll survive. What's up, Rob? Thank you. One of the weird things that I would tell y'all, I don't know if I told y'all this, is I'm on medication for obviously diabetes and other things. And I went to get, kind of give you an update on the wife. I went to get my medication last week. I don't know if I told y'all this. I went to get my medications last week. It's over $6,000 worth of medication. God bless insurance, okay? That's a lot of medication. It's the 3-month supply. I went and got it. It's a whole bag full of medication, Trulicity for the diabetes. I take the Invocamet, and then, of course, I take a statin drug. Oh, yeah. I went and got all these medications, put them in a big bag. They put them in a bag. And my wife was with me, and she was sitting in the front seat. And I said, here, hold this bag. And, of course, we had gone to Hardee's, so we had a bag on the trash on the floor, which was from Hardee's. But I said, hold this bag. She saw me go in and get the medication. I said, hold this bag. This is my medication. She said, okay. I said, and I was jokingly said, I'm going to stop by the landfill. And since, we live in a county, so we just are a mile from the landfill. So we take our trash to the landfill. I don't have a pickup. So I have the Jeep Gladiators loaded up with trash. We head to the landfill. And I say, stay in the car. I jokingly said, stay in the car. I don't want to accidentally you throw away my medication. I was laughing, joking about it. And she's like, come on, I'm not that dumb. Okay. Most of y'all know she's in the early stages of Alzheimer's, or memory. But she was joking about it. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll get out and do this. I got out and started throwing the trash into the dumpster from the back. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting there. She's sitting there beside me, helping me take the trash out on the other side of the Jeep. And I didn't pay no attention to it. I'm throwing the trash in the big dumpster. And we get in the car, and I didn't even think about it, and we're leaving. And then we get home, and I go, where's my medication? She's real quiet. And I'm like, darling, did you throw my medication in the dumpster? And she says, I don't know. That's what she did. When we got there, got out, she had forgotten in that short amount of time that she was holding the meds, and she thought it was a bag of trash. And when she got out to help me, she just threw it in the dumpster. So it was $6,000 of trash, of medication in the dumpster. No, I'm not going back in dumpster dive. So it was in the landfill. So I'm without medication for the next 3 months. It's slowly getting worse. But it is what it is. And I didn't get upset. I didn't get mad. I was just like, I just have to watch what I eat for the next 3 months and just stay off, I don't watch what I eat, by the way. But, it just is what it is. There's no sense in getting upset. It happened. She felt terrible about it. But within an hour, she didn't hardly remember that she did it. So it is what it is. It sucks. All right. What's up, Leroy? Thanks for joining us. Glad to have you here. What's up, Charlie? Glad to have you here. Good morning, Outdoor. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Peter. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Glad to have you here. Good morning, Estrada. Glad to have you here. Good morning, Ryan's Boat. Morning, fella. Glad to have you here. Anselmo. Glad to have you here. Good morning. Yeah, my liver sends a signal. Yeah, it's probably, probably sending it to everything. Just move from that arm up and over and down, type of thing. Let's see here. Marianne, what's up? It says, I asked Trade Hog about attic hole. I said there's no code reference, but AHA says there is. It might be how you asked it, that type of thing. So it depends on, again, AI is intelligent, but again, it is all how you ask it, and it's all in how you ask the question, that type of thing. Let's see here. Adrian, good morning. Glad to have you here. Good morning, Charlie. Glad to have you here. I really don't have a doctor back here in Virginia yet. We haven't been to a new doctor. They filled my medications from our MedCore back out in Texas, and I had it transferred to CVS. So still have not gotten a doctor out here yet. Okay, real quickly, let's go over to, let's see here. Let's go over to Trade Hog really quickly. And we're at Trade Hog. And let's see here. And we'll type. I don't know what you would have typed, but let's see here. What are the requirements for cables installed near a scuttle hole or access hole in a dwelling? All right, let's see what it says. It's not perfect, but we'll see. Over here, for cables installed near scuttle holes and access hole in a dwelling, the National Electrical Code provides requirements to proper ensures. Article 334.23 refers to installation of non-metallic sheath cable. Okay, and it sends you to 320.23. That is correct. There is the installation tops up within 7 feet, right? And so there's applications. So that gets you started, or get you code locations to where you get started. That type of thing. So it's scuttle hole, very specific. And I'm like, okay, I'll ask it. So is there a different code for this if they have pull down stairs? Okay, so let's just see what it says. Pull down stairs, yes, there are specific considerations to install pull down stairs according to yada, 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 NM cable, boom, 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 top joist 7 feet, this type of thing. So at least it gets you in the area where you need to be in the code, that type of thing. So let's say I could go, isn't there a reduction if it's just an access hole? I'm just asking just leading into asking the questions, having a conversation. And there's the 6 foot nearest edge. So there's a reduction. Yes, for attics, limited access, such as those with scuttle holes. It says the NEC allows some reduction to the extent of protection required. Specifically, 320.23b states that if the attic space is not accessible by permanent stairs or ladders, the cable shall be protected within 6 feet of the nearest edge of the scuttle hole. So I don't know, Marlon. It's all there. It just, again, AI is only as good as how you ask the questions. Really, it's never going to be good enough to read your mind. You have to be able. So I tell people all the time with the Trade Hog, for example, is that you have to go into nothing's going to take the place of having knowledge, right? Nothing's going to take the place of you having some extra knowledge. All you're using a Trade Hog for, I would never want, I told somebody this, I don't ever want the Trade Hog to be something that takes the place of knowledge. In other words, hire an inspector or hire somebody out there and say, that's all right, you don't have any experience, but we'll put you a Trade Hog in your hand. Just go out there and inspect. Never. TradeHog is looking at codes, so it's very specific. It's not going to think for itself. It's not that intelligent. I mean, it is artificial intelligence, but it's not going to be able to do things like that yet anyway. Although you can ask it additional follow-up questions because you know what you're looking for, and if you ask that question, as chances are you know a little bit something about what you're asking, and so you may have to ask it in another way. Eventually, it will get you where you need to be. That type of thing. So it's the best bet. It's not going to be the holy grail for everybody, and it's certainly not going to replace knowledge. That's for sure. Never going to replace any knowledge. If it did that, I probably would just kill the program because I do not want to make zombies. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. Let's see here. Where are we at here? Adrian, good morning. Glad to have you here. Good morning, Charlie. Glad to have you here. Let's see here. Good morning, Rob. Glad to have you here. Erie's in the house. Glad to have you here, Erie. Thanks for joining us today. What's up, Sparky? Throwing out the win. JPB's in the house. Good morning. Glad to have you here, dealing in Alabama. Let's see here. What's up, Edgar? Glad to have you here. Cray Cray's in the house. Nashville, Music City. What's up, Cray Cray? Probably in Music City. You probably don't even like country music, do you? You just happen to be in Nashville. I'm just saying. What's up, Angel? Glad to have you here. I'm doing good this morning. I cannot complain. I cannot complain. Let's see here. There you go. Let's see here. Joseph, good morning. Glad to have you here. All right, let's go on and if we need to ask something from TradeHog, we can anytime. Feel free to post it in the comments. I'm more than happy to go look at it and dig into it a little bit. Again, see what questions it asks, that type of thing for those that may be interested in the TradeHog. Don't forget #win, and you can get it on the spin. So Van Man, good morning. Is on the road going through Georgia. Drive safely. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up where we left off in part 2. We're still in wet niches, dry niches, no niches. We're in the wiring methods now, the branch circuit that's going to go down to these luminaires. Okay, we're in that. Okay. What did Charlie say? Ask the trader, what's the best trade to what? Best trade in the world? We'll see. I don't know if it says electrical. That's an interesting question. Let's see if the TradeHog is biased. Let me ask that question real quick. Let me do a new one up here. Always do a new search up here, a new one. Okay, let's see here. What is the best trade in the world? Let's see what it says. I'm sure what it's going to say. Determining the best trade in the world is subjective. It depends on the various factors such as personal interests, skills, jobs, blah, 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 blah. Interesting. Very politically correct type of question, right? Very politically type of question. I'm going to say, I happen to feel being an electrician is the best trade, all right? So I'm going to be having a conversation here with the TradeHog. I feel being an electrician is the best trade. What does TradeHog say? Let's see. Being an electrician is indeed a highly regarded trade for several reasons. High demand, good compensation. We make the big bucks. There you go. Variety of work, opportunities for advancement. Yep. Job security, independence. A lot of electricians, even though you work for somebody, they let you go out and do your own thing. But you have so many opportunities because there's so many areas that you can branch into, right? I mean, you can branch into being just a service electrician, commercial, residential, industrial. You can do low voltage. You could do smart houses. All this stuff falls under the umbrella. Okay, a plumber, you're a plumber. Maybe you can do plumbing, and then maybe you can do hot water heater replacements, or maybe you could do whatever. But electrician, we have a broad spectrum of things that we could specialize in, right? I'm just saying, there's no better trade. Don't even try to compare the trade. I'm going to say, ain't no way, no comparison. All right, let's get into today's lesson. All right, today we're going to talk about those, we're going to end on these luminaires, at least when it comes now. We talked about what is a wet niche, dry niche, no niche. We also talked about that a dry niche doesn't require a junction box, but a wet niche, okay, and a no niche do require specific types of junctions and boxes and rules they have to follow, right? But a dry niche does not, that type of thing. All right, so let's talk about the wiring methods. Now, wiring methods, it says where the branch circuit wiring on the supply side of enclosures and junction boxes connects to conduit runs to underwater luminaires is installed in a corrosive environment. The wiring method of that portion of the branch circuit shall be in accordance with 680.14. Of course, that's the list that we had. It said rigid, intermediate, all those type of things. So you had lists that you could follow and that type of thing. So it's like saying, look, if you're gonna take it down and to show you an illustration, we're talking about this portion right here. If we're extending down, and here's the junction box extending down to the luminaire right here, or the wet niche. This case, a wet niche means that there's going to be water all around this in this cavity here. Okay, this is the luminaire portion. This is the wet niche, and it mounts in the forming shell. Y'all get that. Y'all know that. And typically, it does have a cord on it coming up, that type of thing. And y'all heard last in episode 2 that we have to make sure this cord is enough that you can't be. It's got to be at least 18 inches down from the normal water line down to the actual top of the lens, but it has to be enough cord to be able to place this on the deck for relamping, all that kind of good stuff. We follow that in episode 2. So if you didn't get it, go back and watch episode 2. We talk about all that kind of stuff for the different types of luminaires. Okay, so if you're coming into it late, go back and watch the other episodes. It'll get you up to speed. Okay, now it's tell us this methods. Now it says exception. We're connecting to transformers or power supplies of pool lights. Liquid-tight, flexible metal conduits shall be permitted. Again, this is only talking about the ones that are power supplies or transformers. So this typically is one that we're talking about would be like a value that's below, okay, this certain low limit, okay, low voltage limit that we talked about in the last episode. So we have the defined in Article 100. We have a low contact limit. Typically on those where we have the transformer or power supplies, it's going to take it down to that. Then we have some allowances where we can say, okay, well, if that's the case, then we can use liquid flexible metal conduit, shall be permitted. The length shall not exceed 6 feet for any one length or exceed 10 feet in total length. So any one section down couldn't be more than 6 feet, but I could have multiple sections that cumulatively is not to exceed 10 feet. Okay, so where are we seeing that in the code? So this is 680.23F. So let me take us back really quickly and make sure I get us right here. Okay, so this is 23F. Let me get us back real quick so we can at least see the code. We gotta kind of sometimes look at the code. So this is what we're talking about right here. So again, it's F in your code. This is F, and F is still under, by the way. We're still talking about, take it up here real quick. We're still talking about underwater luminaires. Okay, that's what we're still trying to end this thing on underwater luminaires. What's up, Poppy? See you, Felix. See you, AJ. All right, so let's get back. So we're talking about the wiring methods, branch circuits down to these luminaires. Okay, that's what we're talking about right here. So it says where branch circuit wiring on the supply side of enclosures or junction boxes connected to conduits run to underwater luminaires is installed in corrosive environments. The wiring method of that portion of the branch circuit shall be in accordance with 680.14. And notice it says the wiring on the supply side of the enclosure or junction box. And I don't know that we have a picture. There you go. So this right here, just as an example, this right here is the supply side of the junction box. Or if this was an enclosure here with transformers in it, okay, so it's a low voltage style. This is the supply side, okay? And you'll notice that this case, it's a rigid IMC. It could be a non-metallic conduit. Again, you've had some allowances. We saw that the other day, okay, coming in, all right? So that's what it's talking about for these type of methods. And it does allow you, it says, we're connecting to the transformer or power supply for pool lighting, liquid-tight flexible metal conduit shall be permitted. Okay, this is in the portions that's connecting here to the supply side. Okay, this portion. Not this portion that's going down. This portion, this side. You have some allowances. Okay, But I think it's critical to see that when it's talking about transformer and power supplies, this is typically going to be those types that are below the low voltage contact limit. It's typically where you get this exception would kick in. Okay. Now, let's go back to the illustration really quickly because I want to show this illustration. So this illustration is pretty busy, and I know that it's going to be hard for folks to see it. But what I like to use this illustration for is the layout of what people that look for a swimming pool application, they look at it and say, look, I just want something that's make it simple for me to understand what the heck I've got to run. And this is an example, right? So here's a panel, okay? It's a panel in your house, and you're going to run this. This is a feeder that's running out, and this could be your pool panel, okay? And here's your pool panel, and you're running it over to a pump. Okay, you notice it has an equipment grounding. We're not showing the equipotential bonding here. This is just the grounding. Okay, so you've got your equipment grounding conductor that runs with it. Okay, right there. And then, of course, here is your feeder. And your feeder is going to, this is out if this is outside underground, this is outside of the building. Now, we used to have, for feeders, guys, we used to have 680.25. We don't have that anymore. Because it's not necessary. You can run different types of wiring methods out there. If it's in a corrosive environment or outside and underground, then you have a list that you're going to follow. Okay, and it's going to be an insulated equipment ground. Okay, and it's going to be size not less than 12. Obviously, this is a feeder. It's probably going to be larger than 12 anyway, but it can't be less than 12, not smaller than 12. So there's the feeder coming out to this pool panel. Now, over here, we're just showing the grounding scheme here, and I know this is hard sometimes for folks to see. So sometimes I try to zoom in, but it's not always the easiest thing to do on here, but that's a zoom in a little bit. So there's our equipment ground. So this is the bus that's in this panel. Obviously, you don't see the neutral because this is isolated. The neutral would be isolated anyway. It's a remote distribution panel. We know that. That's not brain surgery. So we're just showing the equipment ground structure. So here's your grounding terminal bus right here, and you see the green screw just showing you that this is connected to this enclosure. Right, so that's where the feeder would go. And then out of here, these conduits are being stalled over to, in this case, a transformer. And this transformer here has a primary and secondary. Of course, it could be a 120 volt application, right? And you may not have a transformer. It may come straight out of this pool panel. If it's a 120 volt system to the luminaires, it could come out of this panel straight over to a junction box. If it's a wet niche or a no niche, it could come over to this junction box, right? And you see that you're still carrying an equipment ground. So this is not the same. And I bring this up because of a question that was asked, and I was answering the question to some individuals about, I think it's one of my Let's Ask Paul episodes I just recently did. You're not taking the place of the equipment ground. The equipment ground is there to facilitate the operation of an overcurrent protected device, okay? So it's going all the way down here. Now, right here, this is from the junction box, okay? If you have a deck box, if you have a junction box on your pool, then it's going down to the actual luminaire. So this is the wet niche. So if this right here coming down was metal conduit identified as red brass or stainless steel, then I would not need to have this 8 gauge that's running down with it to bond it, okay? I would not need that. Here you see the cord that's coming up for this luminaire. It's coming up through it. Now, if this is PVC, then I'm going to have to install this 8 gauge right here, insulated, okay, up, connects to the same bus, okay? So this will be the screw that's probably in the junction box. So the junction box is going to have a little bus in it, and there is where you're going to take all your equipment grounds up to it, but you're also going to take up to it here. If it's PVC being used, you're also going to be taking that 8 gauge up there as well. So yeah, you've got the equipment ground that's in the cord for the luminaire, which you're going to wrap up enough in here so that it can be stuck on a deck and lifted out onto a deck so you can service it, right? But that's already in the cord. That connects to the bus. And that 8 comes up as well, connects to the bus, okay? That type of thing. Make sense? All right, and there's your equipment ground maintaining it, okay? So you may or may not have in your pool installation, you may not have this transformer. You may just have the pool panel and 120 volt applications are going out, hitting a junction box that's going down to the pool light, or you may have something that's actually hitting this transformer. Okay, so this picture here kind of shows you everything, every possible structure that you might run into. Okay, certainly not talking about equipotential bonding at this point. We're just talking about making sure you have equipment grounds where they're necessary to facilitate the operation of an overcurrent protected device. Okay, it also does serve to help bond all these components together as well. Okay, so yeah, and a key takeaway here is insulated. Okay, insulated equipment grounding conductor. Okay, that was just kind of, I like that illustration because it kind of shows the whole ball of wax, right? That type of thing. But I want to emphasize the importance of equipment grounds run everywhere it's necessary to run. Okay, all right, let's talk a little bit about the junction boxes where applicable, where you have junction boxes. Okay, so we're dealing with 680.24A1 and A2. Okay, so in the National Electrical Code, this is what we're dealing with. So there's a junction box. So here we're at, we're done with, kind of done with the wiring. Let's get down to the junction boxes, okay? So junction boxes and electrical enclosures for transformers or ground fault circuit interrupters. So you notice the "and" in here. So it's junction boxes and electrical enclosures for transformers and GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupters. So it could have a junction box there for the luminaires. And again, you could have a junction box, or you could have the transformer that's there. And it's a listed enclosure for swimming pools applications. Could be right there as well. And that may suffice as the junction box, depending on how you install it. So let's kind of look at, we'll look at this type of thing here, the requirements. So here's what it says about the junction boxes, okay? And then the installation. See, junction boxes. See, a junction box connected to a conduit that extends directly to the forming shell or mounting bracket of a no-niche luminaire shall meet the requirements of this section. So remember what we said yesterday when we were talking about this, that the dry niche doesn't necessarily require a junction box. Whereas the wet niche, it made reference and said, you got to follow these rules. Now, if you do have a junction box for a dry niche, so you still have to follow the rules, but not required to have one. Now, the no niche, which you mount on a frame, that a bracket that mounts on the forming shell, it comes with its own bracket you mount. When you're dealing with those, it's going to end up sending you here to meet it says you got to meet these rules. So you still got to have the deck box for this application. Now, when we say that, again, you could have the equipment in a certain proximity that, the way it's being used, that might qualify, especially if it's below the low contact limit. But typically, when we got 120 volt luminaires that are inside of a pool, typically you're going to have a deck box, and you've got some rules you have to follow for these deck boxes if you're installing a deck box. Okay, so let's kind of look at them here. It says junction boxes used for pool installations where the luminaires are operating above the low voltage contact limit. Okay, so we'll just loosely say that those are the 120 volt style luminaires, right? Okay, and we'll say are required to comply with specific vertical and horizontal spacing requirements. Okay, so if you're dealing with the typical 120 type of luminaires that are going to go in a pool, if that's what you have, then you're going to have, so when the junction box, you need a junction box because these luminaires will have a cord on them and you'll have to splice it. The cord is only so long. So you'll take it up to these deck boxes and you'll make the splice. Okay. Well, these are listed boxes. These aren't your normal boxes. Okay. These are pool boxes. They're required to have a certain number of terminations for equipment grounds in there. They're made a specific way. So again, they're not just a normal box. Okay. You can't just take a normal 4x4 plastic waterproof box with a gasket on it and stick it there. No, these are unique boxes that have to be listed for this specific application. Okay. Now, it said you're going to have vertical and horizontal requirements. It says junction boxes are required to be located vertically, okay, not less than 4 inches above ground level, Okay, so that's the first one. They can't be less. I'll go on and grade this out here. So they have to be at least 4 inches up above grade level or pool deck level. Okay, or not less than 8 inches above the maximum pool water level. Okay, so you have some options. I'll just do this one. So cannot be less than 4 inches. Okay, or not less than 8 inches above the maximum pool water level. What's the maximum pool water level? It's the point where it flows out of the pool, right? We'll look at an illustration, but that's the point it flows out. That's at the normal pool level. That would be at the lowest point. That would be at the bottom of the skimmer, because that would be what's called normal, versus the maximum means that it's at the top. When can it flow out of the actual pool itself? And of those two, it says whichever provides the greatest elevation measured from the inside of the bottom of the junction box. Okay. Junction boxes are also required to be located horizontally, not less, so vertically, 4 or 8 inches, depending on whichever's the greater. Okay. And also requires to be located horizontally, not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool, unless it's separated from the pool by a solid fence, wall, or other permanent barrier that creates a separation. Make sense? Hey, what's up, Mike? Glad to have you here. It says if luminaires operate at the low voltage contact limit or less, and we saw there's a definition of low voltage, means you typically have a transformer or a power supply, and you'll be doing it lower than 120. Okay, then you have 4 different values: sinusoidal AC, non-sinusoidal AC, DC. You have the values. This is all based on this listed low voltage lighting system. It's going to come with this transformer and this listed for pool applications. You're going to get all this enclosure. Okay, so it says if the luminaires operate at the low voltage contact limit or even less, which you may get with some of these new LED pool lighting. Okay, it says the junction box location is permitted to be installed in a flush deck box, provided the following conditions are met. So you have these height requirements and how far the box has to be away. However, if the luminaires are the low voltage contact limit type, okay, well, then it can be flush actually in the deck. And here's what it says. What does it got to be flush? Because if they're 120, then they have a height and they have a distance requirement. But if they're operating at low voltage contact limit, okay, or less, then I can actually install it in the floor deck box. Now, by the way, I will tell you, there is nothing that says that you couldn't put in follow the normal rules, the 4 to 8 inches, depending on the water level. You could, and 4 feet away, you could do that if you want, even if the low voltage. This is permitting you to do it in the deck box, by the way, so that it's basically just flush and nothing to trip over, that type of thing. And by the way, just so you know, most of the lighting that I ever did for the pool, the actual pool box, the actual junction box was under the diving board, so you could actually get to it from the back side, so it would extend out from pool, and the light was typically underneath the diving board, so you could go, it would come up, and you could access it from the back of the diving board. Okay, it's typically the ones that I would do. So anyway, so again, the distance, it was it had no problem meeting the 4 feet and all that type of stuff. Okay. So in order to be in the deck box, it says approved potting compound is used to fill the box, preventing moisture entry. So you're going to be packing that box with an approved potting compound. And then 2, the flush box is located not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool. So you still have that horizontal requirement for that box. It can be in your decking if it's that low voltage contact type of lighting. That's fine. It can be in the deck. That's not a problem. Okay. All right, so this just happens to be if you see this is a typical pool box, okay? So you see the equipment grounds are mounted. Here's your 3 connections, okay, for your equipment grounds, right? And then you see this one larger connection, which is connecting to that 8 that's going down to the wet niche. So I'd assume this is a wet niche going down. That type of scenario. So in this box right here, you see this hole, it's actually has a cover that'll just sit right over top of this thing. Okay. Right over top of it. All right. All right. So I do want to look at the code real quick when it comes to these. So so here's what we talked about. So now this junction box, okay, extending down to the forming shell or the mounting bracket for the no niche, okay, shall comply with the requirements of this section. Construction. The junction box shall be listed, y'all heard me say this, listed, labeled, and identified as a swimming pool junction box. Okay, so again, the manufacturers know this. They're going to make these junction boxes. They're already going to have it marked on there what they are. It says, and they shall comply with the following conditions. 1, be equipped with threaded entries or hubs or a non-metallic hub. Okay, so you can get them where they come with it and it's non-metallic can go in it, or there are threaded entry or threaded hub entry. Okay, next, it says be comprised of copper, brass, suitable plastic. Now, most of them I see the base is brass and the actual cover is plastic, right? Or other approved corrosion resistance material. Okay. So we say suitable plastic. That means it's been evaluated for it. Again, misconception. I mean, most of the pool stuff you get made is, it's going to have to be plastic of some sort. So plastic is very resistant to corrosion, believe it or not. It says be provided. Okay, here's the one we got to be provided with electrical continuity between every connected metal conduit and the grounding terminal by means of a copper, brass, or other approved corrosion-resistant metal that is integral with the box. Right. So if I go back to the picture here. These screws, these are grounds. This is all integral into the box. Okay. All made. These are already there. They're already in the box. Okay. Let's look like we have 2 raceways here. Okay. We'll see the installation requirements in a second, but there you go. So that's integral. I've also seen these before that actually have a bus in them, and it's just one continuous bus with holes with lugs in it. And it's just one bus. So it's built into the actual base of the actual pool box. Again, many manufacturers make different types. Okay, this happens to be a brass one here. It's made this way. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the NEC because let's go back to the NEC. I prefer looking at the NEC on this part. So let's talk about, so that's the box. And when you buy those pool boxes, they will already have the number of entries and the number of required equipment ground terminal terminations and all that. It will already be in part of that box, okay? Now, installation. We were just looking at this, okay? And it says where the luminaire operates over, okay, over the low voltage contact limit. So we're talking about putting in this box. This is your normal 120 volt applications, but it's any of them that would work over the low voltage contact limit, which is defined in Article 100. Okay, so we're assuming these junction boxes are being used in an application where it is not the low voltage contact limit, because those could obviously be flush, right? They could, and that's what it talks about down here. So there you go. So we're talking about the operation of over the low voltage contact limit. It says the junction box location shall comply with 680.24A2A, this one, and, that's an and, so again, it means you got to meet this and that, and it says A2B, which is down here. So here's the horizontal spacing, and here's the vertical spacing for this junction box. It's not brain surgery. If you're going to have these luminaires, especially wet niches and no niches, and you're bringing them up to, because they're going to have cord links on them, you bring them up to these junction boxes. It says where the luminaire operates at the low voltage contact limit or less, then the junction box location shall be permitted to comply. You notice it says shall be permitted, not required. I mean, you could do this if you want. Maybe you're worried about somebody changing something later and the box is already, you want it to be there for the future. I don't know. Then you could still do it this way if you wanted. So this is a permissive statement. Shall be permitted to comply with 680.24A2C. And that is the flush deck box allowance. And that, again, is for the low contacts voltage limit. Okay. All right, so we'll just assume we're doing 120 volt luminaires, GFCI protected, all that good stuff. And we're going to put these wet niches in, and we're going to put the luminaire in, and we're running the cord up to this junction box. Okay, that cord's got the hot and the neutral. It's got an equipment ground in it, yada, yada, yada. Everything's good. Vertical spacing. It says the junction box shall be located not less than 4 inches measured from the inside of the bottom of the box. So they're measuring from the inside bottom of the box, inside bottom, folks, above the ground level or pool deck, or not less than 8 inches above the maximum water level, whichever provides the greater elevation. Okay, so just between me and you, craps and giggles, I would think that measuring it 4 inches above the deck would be adequate, but I guess it'd be depending on your water level, your actual maximum water level, which to me is the edge of the deck anyway, right? But maybe you have this coping that's crazy or something on the edge of the pool, and that could change the distance. Whereas you measured off the deck, it's 4 inches, but if you have the coping where the water could come out of it, maybe you measure from there, maybe it rises up a little bit, and damn, maybe you're trying to follow the exact 4 inches, but if they come and measure from that top edge where the maximum water could overflow it, maybe it's only 3.5. And could you have an inspector gig you on that? Yeah, based on this language, because it needs to be the greater of the elevations. Okay, so you don't just measure off the deck unless the decking is level with the pool and it just turns straight into the pool, then you're probably going to be okay with the 4 inches. I do know that a lot of electricians that I talk to that do a lot of pools, they say, look, I don't play with this. And I say, really? I said, because yeah, he said, because I don't know what could change. So they'll say I'll usually would be a little more than 4 inches. And they also say horizontally. They say I'm usually a little more than 4 feet, just a little more. And he said, they don't want to play with it. They don't want to have a question or anything like that. You know, that type of thing, because a lot of times when you're putting this stuff in, it's not done yet. We don't know what they're doing, coping, what they're going to put around the edge, the perimeter. We just don't know. So again, better to err on the side of caution, but these are the code minimums. Okay. So that's your spacing. That's the vertical spacing, straight up and down. Horizontal, straight out. Okay. Well, it says the junction box shall be located not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool, unless it's separated from the pool by a solid fence, a wall, or other permanent barrier. Okay, so that type of thing. So one of the things that I used to hear a lot of the pool guys would say is that in some of the swimming pools, the sides and the front of the diving board underneath have a metal barrier, and it opened from the back. And so my problem with that is, again, it's a junction box, so it has to be accessible. You have to be able to get to it. So you got to take all those things into consideration. Of course, it doesn't require it to be readily accessible, just accessible. It's a junction box. So I guess you could remove the deck, the deck boards or whatever, I guess the diving board, whatever. But a lot of times we would install them under the deck, and it may be less than 4 feet because it was a permanent barrier there, that type of thing. People don't tend to like these deck boxes just all around, right? But one thing I will tell you is think about your design. If you're doing a pool, notice what it says. It says the junction box shall be located not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool. Okay? And nothing says that it can't be a little further away or, further away from the pool. Again, you just have to make sure that your cord on your luminaire that you have is going to actually make it to that junction box. Okay, so that's just a design thing, but these are minimum requirements here, right, that you have to meet. Okay, vertically and horizontally. Now that flush deck box says if used on a lighting system operating at the low voltage contact limit or less, a flush deck box shall be permitted if both the conditions are met. And we saw this potting compound used to fill the box to prevent the entrance of moisture in the deck box is located not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool. If that's the case, then if I have low voltage contact limit, maybe it's being supplied from that power supply transformer type of listed pool equipment, then I can do a deck box. Just don't confuse this one, right? Don't confuse this one with thinking that I can do the 120 volt and a deck box, because I have rolled up on that and have seen that. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work. Okay. That type of thing. Now, You have other allowances, right? We have, let's look real quick at the code one last time. Again, right here is other enclosures. So this is talking about about junction boxes. Well, you have other enclosures you may. So an enclosure for a transformer, y'all heard me talk about it before. You get these made this way. So you have an enclosure for a transformer, ground fault circuit interrupter, or similar device connected to a conduit that extends directly to the forming shell or mounting bracket of a no niche shall meet the requirements of this section. So again, this is talking about saying, okay, well, this is if I have an enclosure that is used for this, things like the low voltage contact limit stuff, or some type of other listed pool equipment enclosure, okay? And I would use it. And this is an allowance to say, well, I'm not a junction box. I'm going to use this listed enclosure and I'm going to follow its rules. And here are the rules for its type of construction. All right. So let's see here. It says construction. It says the enclosure shall be listed and labeled for the purpose of meeting the following requirements. Number one, it's equipped with threaded entries or hubs or a non-metallic hub. Okay. It says comprised of brass, copper, brass, suitable plastic. So that's very similar. Provided with sealing compound identified for use with the cable insulation, conductor insulation, bare conductor, shield, other components. Sat the a typo. Sat the conduit connection that prevents circulation of air between the conduit and the enclosure. So you're sealing your openings on this enclosure. This is not a junction box, by the way. This is a specifically listed enclosure for use with pools, and it's marked as such, okay? And it says provided with electrical continuity between each connected metal conduit and the grounding terminals by means of copper, brass, or other approved corrosion-resistant metal that is integral to the box. Now, with our box, we saw was a junction box, and it was a brass, and it was designed that way. But this kind of installation of this other enclosure would have to meet all these requirements for the construction of that enclosure. Then it talks about the installation. Well, it says, okay, well, no different here. It says the enclosure shall be located not less than 4 inches measured from the inside. Right? Notice this one says 4 inches from the inside of the bottom of the box above the ground level, very similar, and not less than 8 inches above the maximum pool water level, whichever is greater. So that's the same, no different here. So if I get an enclosure that happens to enclose transformer or GFCI or whatever, or similar device that you may buy, something that's listed for your pool, and it's controlling your lighting, it's an enclosure and it's listed as such, these construction requirements are probably going to be inherent with the construction of it. And you're not going to have to do anything. This is just part of the construction of these other enclosures. And we looked at the junction boxes. This is other enclosures other than something that would be qualified as a junction box that's listed for the pool application. And the spacing, again, spacing looks the same. It says for the horizontal spacing, it says the enclosure shall be located not less than 4 feet from the inside wall of the pool unless separated from the pool by a solid fence, wall, or other permanent barrier. So, folks, it doesn't really matter whether you're doing a 120, type lighting system for your pool. You got junction box requirements. You have deck box requirements if you're, for flush, if you're doing below the low voltage contact limit. Okay. Well, you also may have listed enclosures that may have transformers in them that may be all integral. They may have the GFCI circuit interrupter built into it, all this type of stuff that controls your lighting. So this is a specific enclosure and you're using it and it's listed for this. It's going to have to meet this construction requirement. Well, the manufacturers are going to take care of that. I think Hayward is a big manufacturer of these different types of boxes, so enclosures. So it's already going to be done. But its installation still has to meet these requirements. Now, I'm going to tell you what, most of these are not going to be installed in these parameters. Most of these for this application are probably going to be installed further away, okay? Further than that 4 feet away, okay? Because of an eyesore around your pool. I'm just saying, okay? It's typically. All right. All right. Now, what about protection for these junction boxes? We have to have protection now for these enclosures that are listed enclosures for these lighting systems or the junction boxes. So we have protection requirements, right? So here's what it says. Okay, well, if that junction box we just looked at, okay, and the enclosures are mounted above grade of the finished walkway around the pool, okay, got to use a little forethought about where you install these, by the way. It says the installer must protect junction boxes and enclosures against physical damage by not locating them in the walkway unless additional protection is provided. So you're not just going to stick them in the decking everywhere, especially in the path that people walk around. Because people don't pay attention. They'll be running, whatever. You're not supposed to run around the pool, but they will, and they'll trip on it. So a lot of times we did this by putting them under the diving boards or things like that, or located them further away, okay? It says locating junction boxes and enclosures under diving boards and affixed to and adjacent to fixed structures are acceptable examples. Yeah, I mean, that's what we used to do. Got it out of the way, that type of thing. Nobody's going to trip over that. Article 680 has specific requirements for wiring methods that supply swimming pools equipment because they are often installed in a corrosive environment. These rules amend the general rules in Chapter 3. It says these requirements can be found in 680.14. We've already looked at that, right? We already looked at, and I had this long thing I told you about. PVC jacketed MC was fine, but you have a list of things like rigid, intermediate, different allowances for the wiring methods to go here. So again, we don't need to look at anything else. Now, one question that people ask me a lot, I get this question a lot. They say, okay, well, what about if the panel's inside and it's running through the dwelling and it's going to hit a junction box before it emerges outside of the building? If that's the feeder, they ask me, does that equipment ground have to be insulated? And the answer to that is no, not if it's not in a corrosive environment. If it's still on the inside and protected by the dwelling, for example, then I could take like an SER and take it to this junction box and then transition from there. But when it leaves there and goes out to a panel or whatnot, then it's outside. And the code said outside or in a corrosive environment, that it requires that the equipment ground be insulated. So the portion that's inside the building, I don't know, I'm just using a Chapter 3 wiring method. The portion that goes outside of the building, I'm going to have to transition and that type of thing. So it behooves you to do that transition inside the building versus transitioning outside, because you could have that inspector that says, once you breach that wall and you're in an outside box, I expect that equipment ground to be insulated. So, you're going to have that discussion with your AHJ, because inside of a box is not a location. Okay, so, I would probably transition before I got out. And that's the way I used to always do it. I transitioned inside before I even went outside. Okay, you're going to have to work that out with your AHJ if you want to do that kind of installation. And no, SCR can't be installed underground. Y'all know that. All right. Okay, let's see. Lastly, let's talk about it seems like I didn't talk about this, but I alluded to this. I don't want to make sure we don't end on these boxes, okay? Grounding terminals in these boxes. So whether it's a junction box or the transformer and power supply enclosure, which is probably going to have a bus in it, it's going to have well more than the required number of terminations. But a junction box that is listed for pool application, that's going to have a specific amount of grounding terminals in it when you buy it. You're wondering, what dictates the number? Well, here's what the code says. It says junction boxes, transformer and power supply enclosures, and ground fault circuit interrupter enclosures connected to the conduit that extends directly to the forming shell. So that's your deck box. That's your junction box, right? That's your unique power supply or transformer enclosure that's listed for the application. From there down to the deck box, down to the actual luminaire, which is in the forming shell, or the mounting bracket if it's a no niche, right? It says it shall be provided with a number of grounding terminals that shall be no fewer than one more than the number of conduit entries. and I don't have a picture here. I was going to show you. Let's see here. So what does this say? So this requirement ensures availability of the integral grounding terminals necessary for the grounding and bonding of underwater luminaires. A box that is not specifically listed for use with swimming pools might not provide the correct number of integral grounding and bonding terminals. Remember, it has to be integral. Okay? It says the number of grounding terminals in a box or enclosure is required to be one more than the number of conduit entries for which the box is designed. Okay? So if we kind of come back here to the lesson, just because you wondered why you have to have a certain number of terminals. And let's look at this box. So this box looks like it could have 1, 2, 3 entries possible. So I have to have one more. Okay. So it looks like I got 1, 2, 3, and there's the fourth one. Okay. So I have one more than the number of entries. Okay. So that's why there's 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. Okay. That's why that box is designed. Okay. Now, a lot of the boxes you'll get, the ones that are plastic and black that you see they'll have a little bus in here. And it'll be just like a little terminal bus that you would see in a panel. Just a little bus in there with the different openings on it, that type of thing. And a lot of them will be like this. We have the brass, which is acceptable, and it'll have the number of terminations on it. This is all part of those pool boxes, part of those enclosures that are listed for pool applications to kind of keep you away, because it's got to be integral into the box, right? So this keeps you from using just any old standard box, that type of scenario. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, let's go on and let's talk about equipotential bonding. All right, so we'll get into this equipotential bonding thing, and this can go deep, and this is where we're going to obviously end today. We're not getting into storable pools. We're going to be talking about equipotential bonding, which is very much applicable to permanently installed pools and not storable pools. And we're not, and in hot tubs, there's certain applications where it's going to make reference or have its own rules that is going to talk about equipotential bonding. But we're in part 2 still, so we're talking about permanently installed pools. By the way, in the 2023 code, the storable pools depth requirement, the 42 inches is gone. Okay, so there is no, it's basically the manufacturer is going to stipulate what is considered a storable pool. Or if it's of deep enough that the AHJ will look at it and go, you know what, you're not going to be storing that thing every year. I mean, its construction and the amount of water that it holds makes it more permanent than storable. That's the AHJ is going to have to make that call, because, again, we don't have a depth requirement anymore. That's been removed when it comes to storable pools. Okay. All right. But we're talking permanently installed pools. Right. So let's go over and look at the equipotential bonding requirement, 680.26. I usually work out of the code for this one. It's a little easier. Now, in 2026, a 2023 edition of the NEC, it's slightly more complicated than the 2020 edition. A little more complicated. It kind of broke it up a little bit. And I'll tell you why it's just a little bit more complicated. It's the reason it's a little bit more complicated is because it used to be that your option was that you could use an 8 gauge and run it around the perimeter, and it was 18 to 24 inches away from the inside wall of the pool, and that would be acceptable. And then, of course, you can use rebar, you could use a mesh grid. That perimeter has to be a 3-foot perimeter, but the 8 gauge was allowed. Well, a lot of study was done that was submitted to the code making panel that says, you know what, that 8 gauge, even though the code permits it, where did that come from? Where did it get into the code? Okay. Most of the times I see decking around a pool that's rebar. If it's a conductive pool shell, they extend it up and out 3 feet. The rebar comes out around the pool at least 3 feet. And that rebar will make the equipotential perimeter part. And it's connected by virtue of the rebar to the actual conductive pool shell. Well, if you have a pool that is not a conductive pool shell, so it has a vinyl liner or it's fiberglass, then you don't have the requirement for the conductive pool shell, okay, which encompasses the pool, okay, the footprint of the pool, but you still have to do the perimeter, 3 feet perimeter. And it gave you ways to do that, right? So that 8 gauge is still there. It's still in the code, but it can only be utilized in certain types of applications. And so we'll have to look at each one. So that is significant restructuring when it comes to the 2023 edition of the NEC. Personally, this is just personal. I think that the 8-gauge option that goes around a pool should be done away with. Based on the data that I saw and the fact that nobody could give the history on where this 8-gauge around the perimeter of the pool came from, nobody could pull up the history. There was nothing in previous code editions that had a historical data for this. And based on the data that I saw on this code panel, I personally, and people say, well, it's been like this for years. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know that we have all of the accident reports of things that happen around pools. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the 8-gauge, somebody asked me if I was building a pool today, and I ain't because they're too much maintenance. And the best pool you could ever have is if you have a neighbor that has one and they're a good neighbor and they allow you to use it. Because I never wanted a pool. To each his own. But if you have kids, they're great, but each his own. Too much maintenance for me. I'm lazy. So I know I could hire somebody to do it, but I'm also a tightwad, so go figure, right? So based on what I saw, I just don't think the 8-gauge is viable. I know people have used it. We've used it for decades. I just don't believe that it's based on the research that I saw, which is available, by the way, if you want to go look at Code Panel 17. The research was published. This all has been started since 2017. It's all up there, 2020. You can read it, those type of things, okay? No, the use. I'm not a historian, Tom, so I don't think so. I don't. The use of an 8-gauge has been used I think, a lot longer than when it comes to establishing that perimeter. I don't know. You'd have to look. I don't think that was new in 2008, but I'm not sure. I don't have the time to go back and look, but check it out. All right, so let's talk about today. All right. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of, and I will try to get smaller so that we can see it a little bit better. Let's see here. Okay, try to get a little smaller. So this is just an example of, if I have a conductive pool shell, let's say it's rebar and it's in the concrete, it's in the gunite, okay? You can cannonball in your pool. Yeah, it's fun. I like pools. I just don't want to maintain a pool. I'm just saying. I'm just lazy. So my shit would turn green in a matter of no time, that type of thing. So, and some people enjoy maintaining a pool. Maybe when I retire or something, I don't know. Hey, let's just go with no, I'll never have one. All right, so here you see, this is the rebar. This is the conductive pool shell, okay? This is a rebar. It's going around underneath the pool, yada, yada, yada. Well, the code is going to require equipotential bonding to bring everything up to the same potential as the conductive pool shell, if you have a conductive pool shell. All right, so you have diving boards. The base is metal. Obviously, it's going to be within 5 feet. So it's going to be connected to the pool shell. You got the ladders. They're going to be connected to the pool shell. You've got the wet niches, forming shells. They're going to be connected to this, okay? All right. You have water inlets that may be metal. They're going to be connected to the pool shell, okay? You have all different things that may be connected to the pool shell. You've got motors, okay? This is an example of a double insulated motor, which I did a podcast on this, I think, where you still have to take the 8-gauge over to it, and you may or may not have to connect it to the equipment ground. But you need to bring it there. Even if you have a double insulated pool pump motor, still have to bring that 8-gauge over to it. Again, if you have metal fencing, poles, awnings, metal door frames, anything that's within 5 feet, that has to be bonded to the equipotential bonding grid, okay? That type of thing, all right? So all gets tied together, okay? Now, a couple ways to do all this, by the way, is some people think that you can't take the pool shell, which is rebar, and then you have the perimeter, which is, say, the rebar comes up and goes around the perimeter of the pool following the contour. All these things that need to be bonded together can be bonded with a jumper, okay? Now, the interesting thing is you could daisy chain all these things together, but again, you still have to have the perimeter requirement. It has to encircle the pool. So typically what you do is if in the past, if you ran the 8-gauge around bare, because that's what's required to be bare solid, then you would just tap onto it and go to all those things that within 5 feet, or those things that the code said that you had to bond, like the pool pump motors, that type of thing. So you just would connect all those things together and just use jumpers everywhere. The irony is that those jumpers do not have to be bare, because they are not part of the equipotential bond. They're connecting the pieces together. But the component that's in contact with the earth, like the ring, has to be bare, that type of thing. Now, I can tell you right now, most people, and I'll show you this right here. See this right here? These jumpers that are connecting all these things that are required to be bonded, right? Okay. Then here, you notice that these don't have to be bare. Okay. It can be insulated, covered, or bare. That's not required. Now, that's different if you use the 8 around it. Okay. There you go. Okay. Yeah. Well, if it was established in 2008, we do not know exactly where the requirement came from. We have no idea where the single conductor literally came from. We have no idea. As a code panel, we have no clue where that actually came from. Okay. So when we were allowing that 8 gauge to go around, right? We couldn't pinpoint any testing that was done for the 8 gauge. That was our problem. We couldn't pinpoint it. So at that point, it was like, well, since we don't have any data on it, it's been used for years, we'll just leave it. But then when data finally did come in, it shows that the 8 gauge is probably not the best choice. And you can go read the data yourself. Now, some people say it was the manufacturer that makes the grids, a copper version of the grid, the 12 by 12 interlocked grid, welded together for 12 by 12. They said those were the reason. The manufacturers were just trying to get you to buy the copper grid. Well, you could still use the steel mesh like that you put for fencing, reinforcing mesh in the deck, and that was fine. Still can do that today. So I don't think it was them trying to push the copper mesh type of thing, or the copper squares. It's just that based on the research, the 8 gauge wasn't enough, that type of thing. And I even think Fred Hartwell got involved in it. And he also, very knowledgeable guy, also agrees that he just don't think the 8 gauge is enough. Okay, but we still have it in the code. It's just a different application. Okay. All right, so let's kind of look at that. So first of all, let's go on and break all of these down. What is a conductive pool shell? Okay, first of all. So let's go to the code right here. So now you see that we have 680.26 and we have our performance A. Then, so if we do what we're supposed to do here, okay, if we do what we're supposed to do here, it's kind of like 250.4, right? Whereas we have this performance requirement, and if we follow all the rules in 250 beyond 250.4, then we're doing what's called prescriptive. So here it's saying, look, if you follow what I tell you in B and C, then you're going to have this equipotential bonding grid. Okay, good. So it says the equipotential bonding grid by 680.26 B and C is to reduce voltage gradients in the pool area shall be installed for pools with or without associated electrical equipment related to the pool. Okay, so that's important. So whether or not you have electrical equipment that's coming to this pool or not is irrelevant, right? Still got to do it. Still got to put this equipotential bonding grid in. Why? Because you can't have voltage that are being leaked onto the system through concentric neutrals from the utility. There's other reasons that we can have voltage and everything flowing on the earth. Okay, so there's other reasons for that. So again, it's not specifically driven to whether or not we have electrical equipment running to the pool. Because I've had somebody ask me that and say, Paul, I got a pool, right? I ain't got no electric to it. I ain't got no lights in it. I ain't got nothing in it. I ain't got no pool cover. I ain't got nothing. Did I have to do this equipotential bonding grid? Absolutely you do. Okay. And even if you had a fiberglass pool, you still have to do the perimeter. You still have to look for any metal parts that within 5 feet of the perimeter. You still have to bond things like the circulation pump and the filtration pump. If that's on your system, it messes with the circulating water. You still got to do all that stuff. So just because I have a non-conductive pool shell doesn't eliminate the other requirements that we have. Okay, so that's Important thing to make sure that folks understand. Okay? So that's your performance requirement. All right, let's look at the parts. So this is B, and B is going to be B1 through B7. And here's what it says. It says, the parts specified in 680.26B1 through B7 shall be bonded together using solid copper conductors, insulated, covered, or bare. So again, we're not talking about the use of the 8 gauge around the perimeter. You'll see that in a minute, because that has got to be bare. We're just talking about tying them all together, right? So, I mean, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get a conductor. It might be insulated. It might be an 8 gauge. It's insulated, right? So I would use insulated. Does that mean that I can't use bare? No, I can use bare if I want to tie all these things together. And that's probably what you're going to use because you've already bought the bare to go around the perimeter. So you're probably already going to use that. But anyway, I got options. Now it says not smaller than 8 AWG, okay, or rigid metal conduit of brass or other identified corrosion resistant metal. So that again is why you're okay to use brass or other identified corrosive material, typically listed around pools, that would connect deck boxes down to the forming shells and all that, or maybe it connects directly to a piece of equipment and that would bond the equipment together. Okay, if you had rigid metal conduit or of a brass, and yes, I do make rigid metal brass conduit. All right, it says now, connections to bonded parts shall be made in accordance with 250.8. Y'all remember that's the list in 250.8 that gives you the different types, whether it's a tap screw, 2 full threads, or whether it's a machine thread and it's 2 full threads, or if not, you put a nut on it. But it also has to do with lugs, and it could be like split bolts follow under this and all that. So you have different options under 250.8. And it says an 8 AWG or larger solid copper bonding conductor, a 8 AWG or larger solid copper bonding conductor provided to reduce voltage gradients in the pool area shall not, this is important folks, shall not be required to extend or attach to remote panel boards, service equipment, or other electrodes. Not required to do this. So this is telling you that, look, okay, I've got this pool panel. I've got this equipotential bonding grid. I am not required. A lot of people say, well, I got to go from this grid and I got to take it back to the pool panel. No, you don't. You can have an isolated equipotential bonding grid. Now, is it going to be connected to the electrical system? Yes, probably will through pieces of equipment, let's say that have an equipment ground that connects to the frame of the equipment. And if that equipment is like for circulating of the water or a pump or something that's a piece of equipment that's maybe metal frame or stainless, or maybe it's a heater or pool heater, then you're going to bond the frame, and that's going to be bonded to the equipotential bonding grid. And then you have an equipment grounding conductor that runs with the circuit that's going to be connected to a grounded terminal on the equipment. So indirectly, they're going to be connected together through the equipment. Okay? So you're not directly going back to a panel. Now, this doesn't prohibit you from doing that. If you want to do that, that's fine. People say, oh, no, I don't want to connect these together. You can if you want. You're just not required to do it. And that becomes a big deal for people when you're dealing with a pump, if it's a double insulated type of pump, because that rule is, look, if you've got a pool that's got a double insulated pump, and the code's going to require you to bond that pump, okay, to the equipotential bonding grid, unless it's double insulated system. And then it's going to say, well, there's nothing to bond on a double insulated system. Hell, most of those don't even have an equipment ground that goes down with them. So you're going to say, well, what the hell do I do? Well, the code's going to say, you still need to run that 8 gauge over to where that pump is at, because somebody down the road could replace that pump with a standard non-double insulated pool pump. And if that's the case, it's going to have a little lug on there. You're going to need to connect that 8 gauge to it. So you have to prepare. Now, the funny part about that is if I run that 8 gauge over to the pump and it's a double insulated pump and I'm thinking, what do I do with that 8? Well, if I don't have any other electrical equipment around this pump that would would be an indirect connection between an equipment ground and the bonding of the equipotential bonding grid. If I don't have any piece of equipment that those indirectly would connect together in the equipment, if I don't have anything else, then I do have an isolated pool. Isolated bonding grid, equipotential bonding grid. If that's the case, and the code says you have to take that 8 gauge that you're running for this over to this double insulated pool pump, I need you to connect it to the equipment ground of that circuit that runs to that pool pump, right? And you're thinking, the hell am I doing that for? And it's because you have nothing else that's intimate with this electrical system, then you could have two differences of potential. One, you have a potential for the grounding, the premises grounding system, which equipment grounds are connected to. And then you have this isolated equipotential bonding grid at this one location, and it could have differences of potential there, and you could get shocked. So by forcing you to bond them together, then they're at the same potential. Each one are going to serve their own function. There's not enough current that's going to travel through the system onto the equipotential bonding grid because you make that connection. It's not going to be enough that's going to have anything because, again, current takes all available paths, not the path of least resistance, but it's going to take all available paths. Earth is not a good conductive path, okay? Also, in the existing pools that you do today, anytime you run to a motor, a pump motor for a pool, and you have to run an equipment grounding conductor to that motor frame, it's going to be indirectly connected to that same 8 gauge that comes over from the equipotential bonding grid to that lug on the frame of the motor. They're going to be intimate together. If you don't believe me, take an ohm meter and check from the terminal lug for the pump and check the lug on the outside of the motor. You'll see that they will ring out. They are connected together. They're not isolated. Okay. So you do have those intimacy between the two systems. You just may not do it intentionally. And intentionally means I would go straight from take an 8 gauge straight from the equipotential bonding grid over to the pool panel. You're not required to do that. That type of scenario. All right. Hope that makes sense. They serve two different functions, by the way. What is this? Erie says during a home inspection, the inspector couldn't find the bonding jumper coming from the shell because the equipment pad was moved. Okay. The builder added a ground rod and bonded the pool heater and pump to it. This is an old pump, not new. Yeah, but it doesn't meet the requirement to just simply drive a ground rod at the pool pump. Okay, that's an auxiliary electrode. You can have it if you want. I mean, nobody says you can't, but that's not going to solve the requirement. Okay, and hopefully they put GFCI protection on that because, again, you're required, whether it was old or not, to actually have the GFCI for that pump, that type of thing. Okay, that's a retrofit rule. All right. Anyway, let's get down. So those are the rules for that. Okay. So you're not required to take it back to a panel, but nothing says you can't. But you really don't. Usually, there's some other indirect connection somewhere in your pool setup. All right. Let's talk about these conductive pool shells real quick. So what's a conductive pool shell? All right. So bonding to conductive pool shells shall be provided as specified in 680.26b1a or b1b. Okay, so there's A, and there's B. Okay, so what's a conductive pool shell? All right, well, let's see here. It says cast in place concrete, pneumatically applied or sprayed concrete. We refer to things like gunite. Okay, that is sprayed concrete onto a frame. It says and concrete blocks painted or plastered with coating. Doesn't matter, even if it's got plaster on it. Even if it's got some type of coating on it, shall be considered conductive material due to the water's permeability and porosity. Okay, if you've never seen a pool that's plastered, or if you've never seen one that's painted, you will notice that it cracks, it flakes off, or whatever. It's because of the water permeability. The water is going to get through that plaster. The water is going to get in through any of that paint. It's going to wear out. So it is still conductive. So don't let anybody tell you, if I have a concrete pool, and it is cast in place type concrete, let's say, and depending on how it's done, it's not just rebar in it, okay? You're going to see that that's one of the methods to do this. But remember, we got to determine what it is first, okay? And if it's conductive, even if it's got plaster on it, even if it's got paint on it, it's still considered a conductive pool shell. If it's a block type pool, cinder block type pool, whatever it is, it's still. I had a pool growing up. It was a pool for that's like a kiddie pool, but it was for the community. It was made of cinder block, and then they came and they plastered over the cinder blocks. Okay, so basically they were concrete blocks. All of that is a conductive pool shell. Now you've got requirements if you determine it's conductive pool shell. So let's see what our requirements are. Now, one of the things that we added here in the 2023 edition is this right here. It says reconstructed pool shells shall also meet the requirements of this section. So if it's an existing pool and it comes in and it gets reconstructed, it gets fixed, it gets remodeled, it gets patched or added or something like that, the price of this reconstruction just went up, because once that takes place, now you're going to kick into it. It's going to have to meet these requirements. So even if it's reconstructed pool shell, this case is an example of retrofit, because it's going to say, look, if you're reconstructing it, it may have been existing, but now you're going to follow all the rules within this section. Okay, and this section being section 26, by the way. Okay. All right, lastly, right here on this part, it says vinyl liners. Now, somebody asked the other day about would this apply to a concrete pool with a vinyl liner put over it. I'm going to take this as literal. There's many ways to make these pools. There might be a metal side with a vinyl liner on it, and a sand bottom. It may be concrete bottom and then sand sides. Look, if it's a vinyl liner of any way, and this is designed for a vinyl liner, then I'm going to say that that's not considered a conductive pool shell. You're going to have to convince me otherwise. You can say, well, if the vinyl pool rips, okay, then water's going to be leaking out of this, and you got other big problems. So I'm going to take it literally until we change the code and say something differently. So I'm going to say if it's a vinyl lined pool, then it is not a conductive pool shell. Also, it goes on to say, and you can agree to disagree, that's fine. Also, a fiberglass composite shell shall be considered to be a non-conductive material and not subject to these requirements. Okay. Now, we says these requirements. These requirements of being considered a conductive pool shell. It doesn't remove these other requirements like the perimeter bond. It only means that it shall not be subject to these requirements. That is, to be a conductive pool shell. Okay, that's very important. It doesn't say not subject to these requirements in this section. Okay, important distinction. Okay, only applies to this part. Okay, all right. Now, conductive pull shell. First one, structural reinforced steel, rebar. It says unencapsulated structural reinforcing steel. This is be the steel in the concrete, whatnot. Shall be bonded together by steel tie wires or the equivalent. Okay. It says where structural reinforced steel is encapsulated in a non-conductive compound, and you can get the rebar that is encapsulated in a non-conductive compound or coating. If that's the case, we're saying you can use the rebar to qualify, okay, and be part of the conductive pool shell. Okay, there's structural reinforcing steel. If that's not the case, again, if I have these type of pools, then I have to have either structural reinforcing steel in there all through the actual concrete, right? And gunite gets sprayed onto this frame, right? It says where the structural reinforcing steel is encapsulated in a non-conductive compound. So you've got the frame, you've got the steel, right? But it's encapsulated. So it's not in contact with the concrete. It's encapsulated inside of the steel. Inside of a compound. Okay. Then it says a copper conductor grid shall be installed in accordance with 680.26B1B. Okay. So what does this mean? If I have a pool that's a gunite pool or steel pool, you're going to be reinforcing this concrete. So if in order for this conductive pool shell, if I've got structural reinforcing steel in there, it doesn't specifically say rebar. It could be a mesh system. It could be a metal framework system. It could be like a fence mesh, whatever they use to reinforce, okay, the structure of the pool structure. then that is going to constitute our conductive pool shell. Where that may be encapsulated in something, so it's not making contact with the concrete, for whatever reason, you can buy encapsulated, for example, encapsulated rebar. Well, then it's saying, well, it's still the concrete that we talked about. It's still a conductive pool shell. In order to connect it to the other components that we need, I'm going to need you to connect to this rebar. And if it's encapsulated, that's not going to work for me. I need you to do something else. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've ever run into encapsulated pools because the alternative would be a pain in the butt. And here is the alternative, and expensive. You can do it, but it's expensive. So let's just say our rebar is encapsulated. Well, if that's the case, then I got to go with the copper conductor grid. Well, what is this? A copper conductor grid shall be provided and shall comply with the following. So this is be constructed of a minimum of 8 AWG bare solid copper conductors bonded to each other at all points of crossing in accordance with 250.8 or other approved means. Okay, so everywhere that it intersects, it has to be connected together to form this grid. Okay, now it has to conform to the contour of the pool. So basically, it's just going to wrap around the footprint of the pool. It has to conform to the concrete, whether it's a kidney-shaped pool, rectangle pool, whatever. It's got to form to the contour. Basically, it's got to sit down in a cocoon, if you will, of copper. It says, now, this grid shall be arranged in 12-inch by 12-inch network of conductors in a uniform spacing perpendicular grid pattern with the tolerance of 4 inches. Okay, so it gives you a little bit of a tolerance with movement, but basically they intersect, right? And you connect it together. So you've got all these coppers that run this way, and you got all copper that run this way, right? And where they interconnect, you have to use a method that is 250.8. Most of the time, you'll buy these from a manufacturer, and they'll already come in sheets, and they'll be connected, whether they're welded, exothermic welded, they'll be welded together already. You roll these sheets out. Now, the sheets typically only come in certain widths, so they'll overlap, and then you'll connect these together, and they will form this shell, that type of thing. At the price of copper, that's quite expensive. I get it, that type of thing, okay? Let's see, so there you go. Now, what does Thomas say? Common sense would tell fiberglass rebar would require copper, yes. So if you have a fiberglass type rebar or fiberglass encapsulated rebar system, then you're going to have to go with this copper conductive grid underneath it, that type of thing. But again, the trigger for all of these is that it starts out as concrete and something that concrete has to hold on to. It could be the structural metal, that type of thing. So there you go. Now, you could have concrete that maybe is, I don't know, any type of forming. I'm not a pool builder expert, but some type of forming the shell that is non-conductive, but it's concrete, so you have a choice. You either use structural reinforced steel or you use the copper grid underneath it. That type of scenario, because you're not going to be able to use it concrete. It's kind of like a UFR in a sense, whereas the UFR is very specific. It has the rebar or a 4-gauge copper encapsulated in it, and they together formulate a concrete encased electrode. So here, to be a conductive pool shell, you have those elements. Okay? So what about those concrete block ones that are painted? They might not have any type of structural reinforcing steel in it, but they're concrete block, they're painted or plastered, they are a conductive pool shell. So what does that mean they're going to have? They're going to have this copper grid. Okay? That type of thing. Right? So those are your two options in order to get you a conductive pool shell. Okay. Oh, and also, so there you go. So that's we missed one. So let's do the last one. So that's a 12 by 12 grid. Okay, basic checkerboard. And then lastly, it says be secured within or under the pool no more than 6 inches from the outer contour of the pool. So it's either up against the pool, but it can't be more than 6 inches outside the perimeter of the pool. So this is an example right here of the rebar being used. And there's your wet niche over here. Looks like a wet niche, possibly right here. So all of this right could be something else, but yeah, no, this right here, let's see this right here. This looks like this is a no niche right here. Okay, coming up. And it might have a mounting bracket on it that mounts over to right here, the brackets or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, this typically looks like a no niche. All right, so at any rate, this is all that concrete. I mean, this is where you're going to have the rebar, and it's all concrete, right? And this is all in the pour, so this is not a problem. But if it's the copper mesh, then again, it has to be within 6 inches of the pour. Okay, so it would be underneath it, or it could be in it. Okay, we don't have a problem with it putting it in it as well. All right, but that's a good example of a pool, and you see the contour. Okay. All right, let's get back to where we're at. All right, so that's that. And I don't know what the commentary is any good. Let's see here. Encapsulated reinforced steel does not provide the conductive necessary to establish the required common bonding grid around the contour of a conductive pool shell. Right, that's what it's saying. Because like Tom said, maybe like fiberglass type. It says, therefore, a bonding connection to the encapsulated reinforced steel, such as epoxy-coated rebar, is not required. So you don't have to bond to the rebar because it's not a conductive pool shell. However, a copper grid around the contour of the conductive pool shell must be provided and constructed as prescribed in 680.26b1b. That's what we talked about in that 4 criteria. Okay? All right. So there you go, right there. All right, perimeter surface. Everything else gets pretty easy, but the perimeter surface, this one has, as you can see, all this gray, and you can see down here, all of this kind of tanned out. It just kind of, it went kind of crazy for that perimeter. All right, so let's establish what we're dealing with. What is a perimeter surface requirement? Okay, so this is around the perimeter. So we've already established conductive pool shell. You may or may not have one. Maybe a vinyl pool. It may be a fiberglass pool, and you don't have a conductive pool shell. Okay, or you may have one. Now, what about the perimeter around the pool? Okay, and I want to show. So this is what we're talking about right here. So, let me go back to this picture real quick. Right here. So here's your structured reinforcing steel that happens to be part of the pool, conductive pool shell. But the simple thing would be here. Coming off of it, right? Coming over, and it goes out perimeter. It's 3 feet out. So this goes out from the edge of the pool, 3 feet out, and this goes all the way around the perimeter of the pool. Okay? All right? Makes sense? Okay, that's one way to do that. Now, there is another way to do it. We'll look at it, and this is the one where you have the 8 that runs around the perimeter, and it's installed between 18 and 24 inches on the inside wall of the pool. Okay, and you see it's connecting to the rebar here, and it's coming out right here and here, and this will go all the way around. This will go all the way around the perimeter of the pool right here. So that's why you see it's going through a split bolt right here, all the way around. That's one way to do it. And of course, you're going to see that the other way to do it here in a second would be here, whereas you can use a grid. Okay, these are 12 by 12, so that's the 3-foot grid that goes around the perimeter. So it made common sense to me when they presented this, by the way, made common sense that this is a lot of surface area. 12 by 12, this grid, this rebar runs all the way around the perimeter. That's a lot of surface area in contact with the earth. This 12 by 12 copper grid, 8 gauge, it runs around the perimeter. That's a lot of copper. That is a lot of contact with the earth to reduce the touch potential from here to here. Okay, makes sense. With this one, it's 1 8 gauge running around the perimeter, 18 to 24 inches from the inside wall of the pool. That surface area on that single conductor goes around the pool. It's just that one conductor. Okay, all this is right here is connecting over to it from here. Okay, so don't think this is any grid. That's not. That's just connecting this single 8 that's running around the perimeter right there. That's the only thing that connects to it. Okay, runs around the perimeter and do it at 4 corners. Okay, evenly distributed at 4 places around the pool. Okay, same for all these, by the way. All right. So, and when you've got a structural steel like this, then you don't need to worry about that because it's always connected to the conductive pool shell as it wraps all around the pool, that type of thing. Okay. So anyway, you have three options. Now we have to unpack these options. Okay. So here's where your options are because you can't just go to the 8 gauge anymore. So let's look at what the code says here. All right. You ready? This is a lot. We're going to unpack this. It says the perimeter surface to be bonded shall be considered to extend 3 feet horizontally beyond the inside wall of the pool, while also at a height between 3 feet above and 2 feet below. Because you could have a pool that is on the side of a slope, or it could be on the side and the hill kind of goes up at an angle. So you could not, and not everything is flat. Okay, you could have a pool where it drops off at the edge or it goes uphill. Okay, so that type of thing. So we've got these new dimensions, these dimensions that say, okay, I get it. From the edge, 3 feet out, but also depending on which way it goes. Okay, now that's not the hard part. Okay, so 3 feet beyond horizontally from the inside wall of the pool, while also at a height of 3 feet above and 2 feet below the maximum water level. Okay, it says the perimeter surface shall include, all right, you ready? Unpaved surfaces, that's grass, folks. Okay, unpaved surfaces, concrete, and other types of paving. All right, so we made it very clear that we're talking about not just pavers, not just a poured concrete that's stamped, but also earth. Okay, all the way around it. Unpaved surfaces. You could have a pool that just simply has a walkway around it that's grass. Still going to comply here. Okay, all right. Just kind of making sure you follow me on that. All right. Now it says perimeter surfaces separated from the pool by a barrier wall or building 5 feet in height or more shall require equitential bonding only on the pool side of the perimeter wall or building. Okay, so what this means is that I happen to have this fancy pool and I have a wall that can't get 3 feet out, so it's only 2 feet out, and I have a wall there. Well, I can't get 3 feet out. The wall is only 2 feet away. So this rule is saying the equitential bond, where the code says it has to be 3 feet around, not in this area. It only has to be 2 feet, and that's fine. I don't have to go on the other side of the wall, okay? So as long as the perimeter wall is 5 feet in height of the wall, then I can stop at that wall, okay? I don't have to go beyond that wall on that side. They're very common for people with property limitations that they put a pool in and they might put a retaining wall that is 5 feet high or whatnot, and then you've got this limitation. So I only have to do the side of that's closest to the pool, okay? That type of thing. Makes sense? All right, so again, the perimeter surface from the pool, 5 feet in height or more, shall require equitential bonding only on the side of the wall. It says the bonding to perimeter surfaces shall be provided as specified in 680.26 B2A, B2B, B2C, and B2D. Okay? So we have all of these requirements for the perimeter, depending on what we're dealing with. And we're going to look at each one of these, okay? Now, it says, for conductive pool shells, where bonding to perimeter surfaces is required, okay? It says, it shall be attached to the pool reinforcing steel or that copper grid, whichever you have on a conductive pool shell, whichever you have, at a minimum of 4 points uniformly spaced around the perimeter of the pool, okay? Or if the bonded perimeter surface does not surround the entire pool, it shall be attached to the pool reinforcing steel or copper conductor grid at a minimum of 4 uniform spacing points along the bonded perimeter surface. Okay, what does that mean? Let me unpack that. So I have a pool, and I'm going to bond it around the pool at a minimum of 4 spots. If I have some part of the pool, right, that I can't, that is not bonded, or I can't get to it to do this bond, then it says, okay, well, that it's not bonded for maybe due to the construction of the pool, then I can put the 4 connections somewhere else. They don't have to be uniformed around. I can put them at the portion where it is bonded, where this is being made. Then I can do it. Okay, that's what it's saying. That makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know in the comment. All right, so again, for that conductive shell, again, you're going to have 4 uniform points around it. Or if the bonded surface does not surround the entire pool for some reason, you don't have it around the pool due to construction. Maybe there's something there, a wall, it butts up to a wall or something. So you have no distance there, so you don't have any bonding around that side of the pool. Then it says, you know what, that's fine. Just do it only on the bonded area. So let's say I had a pool that had a wall with a waterfall or something on one side. Well, I've got no distance over there, so I can't am I going to put this around the pool? So, but I do have a portion of the pool, the contour, that does have the 3 feet out. Well, since I can't do it at all 4 corners around that pool because of this area that's not bonded because of, let's say, the wall or a waterfall, then I'm going to space them out evenly on the portion that is bonded to the conductive pool shell. Okay, see what I'm saying? Hopefully that makes sense. If I have a circle and I have a line through the middle of the circle and this half of the circle is not bonded around it, then only the portion of the circle that is bonded around it do I have to put it 4 places, and I can put them uniformly around that portion because that's the bonded portion. If you don't get it after I said it that many damn times, and I can't help you. Or I'm not an effective instructor, and that could be possible too. I've been called worse. All right, let's see here. Let's keep on going. Now, let's see here. Right here. Okay, now it says, for non-conductive pool shells. So you remember what we said? What are we doing with these pool shells that are non-conductive? Like the vinyl pool or the fiberglass pool or whatnot like that. So non-conductive pool shells, it says bonding at 4 points shall not be required. And the perimeter bonding shall be attached to the 8 AWG copper equipotential bonding conductor, and if present, to any conductive support structures for the pool. Okay, so I may not have the conductive pool shell to connect to if I'm dealing with a non-conductive pool, a shell, fiberglass, whatever, but I still have the potential. I have to tie these things that are within 5 feet, or like the railings, or maybe a diving board that's metal. I have other metal components within 5 feet and all that kind of stuff. So I still have to tie all those things together. Even though it's a non-conductive pool shell, I'm not removing the other requirements to bond things together under 680.26. Okay? I'm not ignoring any of that. I still have to do it. So don't think you get a free pass just because you're doing a non-conductive pool shell. Not when it comes to the perimeter bond. Okay? That's what it's talking about. Let's see here. All right, so now let's get into each one of these. See what we got to do. What are our options? All right, here's the first one. All right, so here's the first one. We have a conductive paved portion of a perimeter surface. Okay, this could be pavers, masonry pavers, but again, it is the conductive portion. Okay, all right, so it says conductive paved portions of the perimeter surface, including masonry pavers, if used, shall be bonded with unencapsulated reinforcing steel in accordance with 680.26B1A, okay? Or, okay, so that means I could put the copper grid under it. That was the 680.26B1A, right? Or I could have rebar that's part of the actual perimeter, okay? So that would be this example right here. Oops. This example right here. It's right here. Okay, this is the steel. It's unencapsulated. Okay, that type of thing. These two are connected together. I could do that in that conductive pool shell. All right, I'm fine there. That's what 680.26B1A is all about. And again, that's your reinstructing steel. So that's okay to turn that out and be a perimeter. Okay, we just saw that. That's fine. All right, that's not a problem. Also, it says, where are we at? Right here. Or with unencapsulated steel structural welded wire reinforcing. So that's like a welded wire mesh or welded wire fabric bonded together by steel tie wires or the equivalent. So this one allows me, and this is where everybody threw a fit. They were like, well, you're requiring me copper, right? Or you can use rebar. But this is also allowing that perimeter to actually be that metal mesh, like fencing mesh, inside of the concrete that's adding to the structural reinforcement of the decking. That is okay too, as long as it is not encapsulated in anything. So you roll these out, they come in rolls, you roll this out, you're okay to use that too if you want. And that's the cheapest way, by the way, unless you already have the rebar coming out. Okay, so that allows you to do that. So that steel welded wire is perfectly fine as well. That's the cheaper way to go, by the way, is to do that. All right, and so let's see here. So the steel wire reinforcing shall be fully embedded within the pavement unless the pavement will not allow embedding. If the reinforcing steel is absent or is encapsulated in the non-conductive compound, or embedded is not possible. Okay, we're talking about the steel, by the way. It says unencapsulated welded wire steel reinforcing or a copper grid shall be permitted and shall be secured directly under the paving and not more than 6 inches below the finished grade. So long story short, I am permitted to use the wire mesh. Roll it out. Typically, it's very common in fence applications. Now, when you do use the wire mesh, you still got to have certain criteria for that. Okay, so we're going to look at that here, but that's the cheaper way to go. Wire mesh and put that in it, and you either put it in the concrete, but a lot of times I see concrete that is fiberglass reinforced, and so they put the mesh underneath it. It's still cheaper. Okay. But if you already have the rebar coming out, that's probably the cheapest because it's all the same rebar that they use to build the pool, that type of thing. You have many ways, many options here. All right, now, here's what it says right here. It says unencapsulated steel welded wire reinforcement that is not fully embedded in concrete, so it's not in the concrete. Okay, it's not embedded. Typically, I would embed it in the concrete because it's adding actual reinforcing to the actual decking. It says, and the copper grid, regardless of the location, where used for equipment equipotential bonding, shall be listed for corrosion resistance and mechanical performance. So either one of these. So this says and, so it's either one. So typically, most of the fencing you buy is going to be like a galvanized type of steel or have some type of protective coating on it from corrosion, okay? All right, now it says this listing requirement, and again, this is for things like that steel wired mesh. This listing requirement shall become effective January 1st of 2025. Prior to that, you could just pull up and use some standard old wire mesh, right? We don't care. But as of January 1st, then you can't, right? It has got to be listed and evaluated and say, okay, well, it's evaluated for corrosion, for protection from corrosion and things like that. We're not talking listed for use with pools. We're saying it has to be evaluated for the location or corrosion resistance that you'll be using it, okay? Now, the copper grid or unencapsulated steel welded wire reinforcing shall also meet the following. Okay, so if you want to use a copper grid, remember, it's very similar to the same way it was under the conductive pool shell, a 12 by 12 configuration, yada, yada, yada. If you want to use that, and they make that in rolls that are 3 feet that you can just roll down around your perimeter if you want. Copper grid is constructed of 8 AWG solid bare copper and arranged in accordance with 680.26B1B3, and that is your 12 by 12 configuration. The steel welded wire reinforcing mesh is a minimum ASTM 6x6, okay, or minimum number 3 rebar constructed in a 12-inch grid. So I can use the welded wire reinforcing mesh It's got to meet the ASTM 6x6, or I can just use a minimum number 3 rebar, and that is constructed in a 12x12 grid, okay? So it just overlaps and makes the same type of grid as the copper would make, okay? It says the copper grid and the steel welded wire reinforcement follow the contour of the perimeter surface, extend not less than 3 feet horizontally beyond the inside wall of the pool. Okay, so remember what we're talking about. We're talking about for conductive paved portions of the perimeter surface. So if you got paving or that type of thing, or concrete around your perimeter of your pool, you've got 2 choices here. Notice something, folks. In these choices, you no longer have the choice to use the solid 8. Many people are going to lose sight of that. You no longer have that allowance for this application, okay? Now I'm going to put rebar, and I want to make a 12x12 grid and run it around, or I'm going to use the copper mesh, or I'm going to use copper and make a 12x12 grid of this copper, usually buy it in a 3-foot roll it around the perimeter of the pool, be done. Or I'm going to use unencapsulated steel wire mesh that meets that ASTM 6 standard, or the ASTM standard 6x6. I'm not really familiar with that standard, but anyway. So in that scenario, if I've got that, then I have to make sure that it comes out from the inside edge of the pool 3 feet all the way around. Whether I use the mesh, or I use the copper grid, or I use the rebar, it's got to come out 3 feet. Okay. All right, let's go back. All right. Also, only listed splicing devices or exothermic welding shall be used in that scenario. So listed splicing devices, you have to use either listed splicing devices, or you could exothermic weld this if you wanted, that type of thing. And also, most of the stuff that you get in 250.8 for grounding and bonding is going to be okay. Also, that fencing, I guess, see this down here? You have this informational notes. Notice this ASTM A615 is a standard specification for deformed and plain carbon steel bare for concrete reinforcement. You got that. Let's see. In here, you've got ASTM A1064. It's a standard specification for carbon steel wire and welded wire reinforcement. Okay, so you have all these. So this is good. And again, here you see typically zinc coated steel welded wire reinforcement. Okay, that's to go in and keep your concrete from cracking, and it adds strength and stability. So those are neat to have. That's a good example of an informational note telling you where you may need to go and where you can go to look at these. And the mesh that you get will probably have this ASTM standard stamped to it, right? All right. All right, so let's move on now. What about unpaved portions of the perimeter? Okay, so unpaved portions of the perimeter surface shall be bonded with any of the following methods. Okay, unpaved portion, grass, mulch, all those things that are unpaved. So what does it say here? It says, okay, well, copper conductors shall meet the following. It says a minimum of at least one minimum 8 gauge bare copper, solid copper conductor, including the 8 AWG copper equipotential bonding conductor if available. It says the conductors follow the contour of the perimeter. Okay, you're wrapping it around the perimeter. Only listed splicing devices or exothermic welding can be used. By the way, there's plenty of these listed split bolts that can be used to interconnect these type of things. It says the conductors is located within 18 to 24 inches from the inside wall of the pool, so you're following it around the perimeter. It says the conductor is under the unpaved portion of the perimeter surface, 4 to 6 inches below finished grade, so you're burying it below the unpaved surface, 4 to 6 inches. Okay, obviously you're just going to dig it down in the earth, so it's got to be 4 to 6 inches down. And it says be installed only in perimeter surfaces not intended to have direct access to the swimmers in the pool. So this type of area would only allowed for this installation on the perimeter surfaces that are, again, not intended for people to go in and out, the direct access, like the stairs or the ladders or all that kind of stuff. That's the direct access, not indirect, but the direct access to the pool. Okay, so like down ladders, downstairs, and all that kind of stuff. Anywhere else is not a problem. But again, the direct access would be intentionally putting things like stairs and ladders and all that. That would be more of a direct access. Okay, so that's why they say it direct access. Okay, all right. Next, you'll notice, so you can use the wire. Okay, again, unpaved surfaces, and then it says, or I can use the copper grid or the unencapsulated steel welded reinforcement used for equipotential bonding for unpaved portions of perimeter surfaces shall meet the following. Again, follow the rules that we just looked at before. Same thing for that steel or the copper grid. Same rules right here. I'll click on it so you can see it. Same rules we just covered for the conductive portion. Same thing we just went through right here. Got to follow all of that at your choice. Okay. And it's to be located within the unpaved surface between 4 inches to 6 inches below the finished grade. Okay, so it is underground. Okay, so I can put this grid down and maybe put sod over top of it, although again, it's got to be 4 to 6 inches below the finished grade. Okay, now, what's the takeaway for this one? This only allows you to use that 8 gauge around the perimeter in the areas that are not direct access, which is going to make it a pain in the butt because you may have to change over from the wire to a grid in those portions where you have direct access and then transition back to the wire, the solid single wire around it. Pain in the butt. But this only applies where? This only applies to unpaved surfaces. So you're not allowed under paved surfaces, at least so far. For conductive paved surfaces, you're not allowed to use the single 8 anymore around the perimeter. So that is no longer allowed. Unpaved surfaces, fine. Paved, conductive paved surfaces, not allowed anymore. Okay? Now, let's look at the non-conductive perimeter surfaces. Okay? What would that be? Okay, so non-conductive perimeter surfaces, maybe it's wood. Maybe you have a non-conductive wood around it, wood, plastic, something like that, fiberglass around the perimeter, fiberglass composite, or something that's non-conductive perimeter, whatever it may be. Here's what it says. It says, the equipotential bonding shall not be required for non-conductive portions of perimeter surfaces that are separated from earth or raised on non-conductive supports. Okay, so I'm not required if I have this equipotential bonding, I'm not required to do it if it's a non-conductive portion, say fiberglass or plastic or whatever is wrapping around the perimeter, okay? Or for some reason it's raised around the perimeter and it's raised and I'd be walking around the perimeter on a non-conductive support, let's say a decking or something like that. Okay, now it says, and it shall not be required for any perimeter surface that is electrically separated from the pool structure and raised on non-conductive supports above an equipotential bonding surface. Okay, and it reminds us here, it says non-conductive material included but are not limited to wood, plastic composition. I guess that would be like that tech boards or tech decking or something like that. Fiberglass or fiberglass composites. Okay, so that's your conductive perimeter. So I'm not required to do really anything for this perimeter if my perimeter is a non-conductive surface around the perimeter. That type of thing. Now D is saying, okay, what is D talking about? Now this says interconnecting of bonded portions of perimeter surfaces. Okay, what does that mean? All right, well, it says all surfaces where equipotential bonding is required. Remember I said it could be separated up. You could have an area that's around a pool that is not. Okay, have a good day, Tom. I could have a pool where part of it has the bonding grid requirement, and then there's portions that's not, but I might need to connect this portion that is bonding requirement to a portion that, past a portion that is not. So I have to connect these and all these together, right? How can I do that? And what's okay with the code to do that? Well, it says all surfaces where equipotential bonding is required shall be interconnected using listed splicing devices or exothermic welding. It says where copper wire is used for this purpose, in other words, you're taking one surface that's required to be bonding and extend it to another surface that's required to be bonding. You're connecting together. It says it shall be solid copper, not smaller than an 8. It says the conductor shall be permitted to encircle the pool to facilitate the bonding connections at portions of the perimeter covered in 680.26b2a and b2b that are not contiguous or contiguous. What does that mean? Okay. So what that means is if I've got a pool that's round and I have this area over here and I need to bond, and let's say I have two sides of this pool are not requiring any bonding because maybe there's no space between the pool and a wall, but the sides are, and I need to connect these two together, then the code is saying I can run an 8 gauge around the pool to connect this component around to connect this component, okay? Because they're not connected together. So this is basically telling me how I can interconnect these separate portions of your perimeter bond that's required to be connected together. And again, it's really similar to also using 8 to connect later all the other components that are required to be bonded to the equipotential bonding grid. You're typically going to use an 8 as well, okay? All right. The only difference in this one is that it's sitting there going, okay, if I'm running from here, I got to get all the way around to the other side, then I got to be careful. You got to be careful how I route it. But it lets me route it. I don't follow contour if I don't need to. I just do what I got to do to get from here to here. And it's going to allow me to run an 8 to be able to do that. Okay. All right. I don't know if there's any pictures. All right. So let me just look here. So this is probably, we pretty much covered all this and beat most of this stuff to death. This is probably the important one right here that people ask, because now we're putting decks and we've got the platforms around them and all this kind of stuff. Is it says this requirement does not apply to decks constructed of non-conductive materials such as wood, plastic, or fiberglass. However, the perimeter surface under an elevated deck around the pool installed on or partially in the ground requires the bonding. So it still has the perimeter rule. We're just not talking about having to bond the portion that is non-conductive, that is plastic. You still have you still have your 3-foot requirement. You still have those requirements, okay? It says the required perimeter surface bond must be connected at 4 evenly spaces around the pool perimeter to the conductive pool shell. Connections between the surface bond and the non-conductive pool shells is not required because obviously I don't have to have the 4 corners on a non-conductive pool shell, but I still have to make sure that I have the grid around the perimeter of the pool, okay? We're not getting rid of that part of it, okay? All right, now we're getting into the other things that have to be bonded now. So the perimeter, we kind of made it very clear. You should know by now what you can and what you can't do, when you can use an 8 gauge around it and when you can't. If you're in the 2023, your use of the 8 is very limited, okay? But now, let's look at metallic components. It says all metallic parts of the pool structure, including reinforcement metal not addressed in 680.26b1a, okay, shall be bonded. So this one, by the way, here is talking about all the rebar and stuff that's making up the perimeter of the pool, making up the pool shell. It says in addition to that. We're not talking about that. That's not what this is talking about. Okay, it's in addition to that. So this is talking about all that reinforcement. They all gets tied together with steel tie wires anyway. So that all gets bonded together. That's a no-brainer. Okay, now, but we're talking about all metal parts of the pool structure. It just happens to include that reinforcing metal not addressed in 680.26b1a. Okay, it says now, where reinforcing steel is encapsulated with a non-conductive compound, The reinforcing steel shall not be required to be bonded. So this says that, look, you could have some pieces or components in this conductive pull shell or a piece of equipment that's installed on it or some type of metal part that's part of the pull structure that is encapsulated. Well, obviously, if it's encapsulated, it does not have to be bonded. That goes without saying. Okay, so if I have some specific component, say the whole rebar is not encapsulated, but I have some portion for something that I'm putting in and it's encapsulated. Well, I don't have to go scraping off any encapsulation out of for that portion. It's just saying, you know what, those portions I do not have to do it. Okay, so I can just ignore those portions. But all the other portions all get tied together, all metal components. Also, this may have to do also when you deal those pulls that are made up of the metal frames that go around the pull that bolt together. Okay, the bolts together are fine. They make the metal, but a lot of times in that metal, they will have lugs on it for you to bond those metal components to the equipotential bonding grid. Okay, that's what you have. So it's saying if I have any type of the pull structure has metal parts, depending on how it's constructed, not just the rebar component, but other structural metal parts that are metal, then they all need to be connected to the equipotential bonding grid. Okay, if it's part of the pull structure. Makes sense? All right, let's go back to the code. All right, next. All right, the underwater luminaires. Okay, the underwater luminaire says all metal forming shells and mounting brackets of the no-niche luminaires shall be bonded. And where are they bonded to? They're bonded to the equipotential bonding grid. They'll be either bonded to the perimeter or they'll be bonded directly. Typically, these are be bonded directly to the conductive pull shell, that type of scenario, okay? Exception. Listed low voltage lighting systems and with a non-metallic forming shell shall not require bonding. So again, if you have a low voltage lighting system that's being put into the pool, and it may have a forming shell for it, and it's non-metallic in nature, then obviously there's nothing to bond to, guys. That's all it's saying. Now, I can promise you that there probably is, in some of these, there's going to be something that's built into the cord that goes down to it. But again, if it's a low voltage, it may not even have an equipment ground running with it, depending on the system. But this is just saying, you know what, I don't need to connect to it. And this will be a no-brainer because it's a non-metallic forming shell. What the hell are you going to bond? Next, metal fittings. So all metal fittings within or attached to the pool structure shall be bonded. So metal fittings that are in the pool, in the water, okay, attached to, all these metal fittings have to be bonded. But we have some size stuff because it doesn't mean that I'm going to go around and try to connect all these damn little metal fittings that are all over a freaking pool, okay? It's too many places. So what does it say? All right, all metal fittings within or attached to the pool structure shall be bonded, okay, except the following shall not be required to be bonding. All right, the first one says isolated parts that are not over 4 inches in any direction, the dimension, and do not penetrate into the pool structure more than 1 inch. So if I have any piece, any component that is not over 4 inches in any dimension, okay, and it does not penetrate into the water more than 1 inch, I ain't got to bond it. Okay, it's just one little isolated component, metal piece. I don't need to bond. What's the odds of it getting? I don't need to bond it. Okay, don't need to do that. Makes sense, right? The next says, well, okay, well, what about if I have pool covers? And you have metallic pool cover anchors intended for insertion in the concrete or masonry deck surface. It says 1 inch or less in any dimension and 2 inches or less in length, they do not need to be bonded, okay? So you don't need to bond these if they're pool attachments and they insert into the concrete or masonry deck surface, all right? And they are 1 inch or less in any dimension and 2 inches or less in the length, okay? So they insert down into the decking system. So if I have something that's designed to hold my pool cover on, it inserts down and it's metal and it goes down into the decking, into the concrete deck or the masonry decking. Look, I don't have to bond. These are going to be all around the pool. I'm not even sure how you would bond these. But the manufacturers know this when they make these. You get them for holding down the pool cover. You buy the cover, they probably come with them, or you can buy them. Again, if they intend to insert into the concrete or the decking or conductive decking, and they are, what does it say? It says if it is 1 inch or less, or the length of it is not more than 2 inches, then guess what? You ain't got to bond those little pieces, okay? I don't know how I really don't know how you would. I've heard horror stories where inspectors have said, I need you to bond every one of these attachments. And I just hope that doesn't happen to you, because I don't know how you explain to them, here's what the code says, right? Next 3, it says metallic pool cover anchors, okay? Intended for insertion into wood or composite decking. Okay, so this is for concrete and masonry decking, but if you had a wood or some type of composite deck, let's say like that tech deck, tech decking or whatever it's called, okay, then it says, well, these anchors for insertion into the wood, okay, it says 2 inches or less in any flange dimension and 2 inches or less in any length. I don't have to screw with it. I'm not going to bond these, okay? It says I don't need to mess with that. Okay, so typically the manufacturers know better. Now, if you go rigging something up yourself, you start creating something and you exceed these dimensions, and then somebody's will come along and say, dude, I'm gonna need you to bond these. So I would go with the ones that are provided by the manufacturer of the pool cover. That way they're probably going to conform to this, and there's no way that I want to think about bonding all these damn connections, these clamps. Ain't no damn way I want to do that. Okay. All right, let's go back. All right, let's talk about electrical equipment. Okay, so this is a 2023 code, by the way. So again, you see it looks a little different. It says metal parts of the following electrical equipment shall be bonded. So this is a requirement for things that are electrical equipment that's being installed to the pool, whether it's a pool cover, whether it's something part of the pool circulation or heating or cooling or dehumidification equipment or water circulation. If it's involved with the pool, then it's electrical equipment. And here's what it says. The metal parts of the following electrical equipment shall be bonded. Number 1, electrically powered pool covers. So you got that little motor, that little thing that does that's going to be required for you to actually bond to the equipotential bonding grid. Pool water circulation, treatment, heating, cooling, or dehumidification equipment, like circulating pumps, okay, the pump circulation. It doesn't matter proximity at this point. It says that, hey, you're going to bond that pool water circulation pump or maybe chemical treatment pump or something like, you're going to bond these things to the equipotential bonding grid. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no argue about whether or not it can come energized. No, you are going to bond it to the equipotential bonding grid. No ifs, ands, or buts. Next, it says, again, we're talking electrical equipment. It says, unless separated from the pool by a permanent barrier that prevents contact by a person, any other, that's an important statement, folks, any other electrical equipment within 5 feet measured horizontally from the inside wall of the pool or 12 feet measured vertically from the maximum water level, folks, being the point where it spills out, okay, not the normal water level, the maximum water level, that's the level that it spills out of the pool, or as measured vertically above the observation stands, towers, or platforms, or any diving structures, okay? All right, so there we go. So this scenario right here is going to cover all electrical equipment that is either 12 feet above or 5 feet. So that's what's kind of covering with that scenario. Means that this can cover an awful lot of electrical equipment in that area. Okay. Now, we do have exceptions. And the exception is to bond the system to the equipotential bonding grid. We have an exception, right? So what does this exception mean? You heard me talk about this earlier. So exception says, look, metal parts of listed equipment that's incorporating an approved system of double insulation shall not be bonded. So they do make, and here you see immediately it talks about double insulated pool pump motors. So for pools, you can get double insulated pool pump motors. Yes, it means any electrical equipment. That's what it says. That's what it says at the very beginning. It says electrical equipment, period. Doesn't say it's, So that's the one that's going to be covered in 3. Okay, you have 1, which is pool pump covers. 2, which is circulation, treatment, heating, cooling, yada, yada, yada. Number 3 says, unless separated by a pool by a permanent barrier, it says contact by a person, any other electrical equipment. Says that right in there. Okay, now you may be in an earlier edition of the NEC where it's not as clear, but it is very clear in the 2023. Okay, now what if the pool pump designer uses a double insulated pool pump? Okay, typically those aren't even going to have an equipment ground. So you bring the branch circuit over to the junction box where you're probably going to whip down to it, to the pump, or maybe from the disconnect. So what happens is you're bringing the equipment ground there, but it depends on the type of system. If it's a double insulated type system pump, then it might not even have an equipment ground running down to it. Okay, it's certainly not going to have a lug on the outside of it for you to connect it to the equipotential bonding grid. All right? And the code says you're not required to bond it. However, the code says, you know what? I get that you're using one of these double insulated pump motors, but all pumps will burn down, eventually will burn up. So somebody may come along and say, you know what, I'm going to replace that with a standard pump that is not double insulated, that does have a lug on the frame, does require the equipment ground to come to the frame, and then you have the lug for the equipotential bonding grid. It's a standard pool pump, okay? A non-double insulated. Okay, well, that could be replaced. So what does the code say you have to do in that scenario? It says, all right, look, it says double insulated water pump motors. It says where a double insulated water pump motor is installed under the provisions of this rule, okay? In other words, we're talking about pool pump motors. It says a solid 8 AWG copper conductor of sufficient length to make a bond connection to a replacement motor shall be extended from the swimming pool's equipotential bonding means to the accessible point in the vicinity of the pool pump motor. So what that means is that even if I install a double insulated pool pump motor, I still got to bring over, right? I still have to bring over that 8 gauge copper solid. I got to bring it over and I got to keep it there in the vicinity of this double insulated pump because somebody could replace it. So I got to make sure that it is long enough so that if they replace that motor with a regular non-double insulated, that my conductor's long enough. So that's what it's saying. So that's what it's saying. So got to be there, okay, regardless of whether or not it's a double insulated pool pump. Now it says where there is no connection. Now here's the part that confuses people right here. It says where there is no connection between the swimming pool's equipotential bonding means and the equipment grounding system of the premise, this bonding conductor shall be connected to the equipment grounding conductor of the motor circuit. That is the line that causes people to be confused. And they say, well, what do you mean if no connection between the equipotential bonding grid and the equipment grounding system exists? Because everybody's used to reading in a code that says, you know what, that bonding grid doesn't have to be brought to a panel. But people forget that you may have another piece of equipment on this premise that runs, that's supplying something at the pool. And it may have been bonded to, like a heat pump frame, okay? And you are required to bond it, right? Because it's with 5 feet, and the circuit that maybe is running to it has an equipment ground running to it. It connects on the equipment, and then you bond the metal frame, then guess what? They are indirectly intimate. Now, you didn't do it directly. I mean, I didn't take the equipment ground and connect it directly to the equipotential bonding grid. It's being done through the equipment, so it's indirectly connected, okay? I didn't run something intentionally back to the panel, but they are intimate with each other. Now, if you look at your pool and you say, wait a minute, the only electrical power that runs to my pool is this pump. Okay, there's no other potential connection between the grounding system of the premise and this direct connection or even indirect connection with this equipotential bonding grid. then there is no connection between them. And if there is no connection between the premises grounding system and the equipotential bonding grid, in this installation, you have to manually connect that 8 to the equipment ground that you ran with that pump motor circuit, brand circuit. You just connect them together in the junction box, and that's it. Now, what happens if somebody comes along later and replaces that double insulated pool pump? They're going to go into that box. They're going to take the number 8 from the equipotential bonding grid. They're going to take it apart from the equipment ground. They're now going to use that equipment ground on the replacement motor that has an equipment ground terminal. And then they're going to take that 8 gauge and take it where it was intended originally, and that is to the lug that's for the equipotential bonding on the frame of the motor. And then you're back to the normal application. And you do have an intimate connection between the equipment grounding system and the equipotential bonding grid through that connection through that piece of equipment. And you may or may not have other pieces of equipment like that. But if you have a pool that has nothing but one pump motor, and you have poles or rods or fence, a metal fence within 5 feet, or a metal awning, if you have all that and you're got to bond it, but you may have nothing that has an electrical source to it, then there is no connection between the equipotential bonding grid and all of the things that you're connecting together. There is no connection between that and the grounding system of the premise, unless it's through a piece of equipment that mutually has both power and an equipment ground, and you're taking the equipotential bonding. Then they are intimate to each other through those connections through that equipment. If you don't believe me, test the equipment ground and the actual equipotential bonding lug on a motor that's not double insulated, and you'll see that they will ring out, okay? They are intimately connected, just not directly connected. Okay, so that's what it means when it talks about that connection. So you just got to do your due diligence to see, is there anywhere else that I'm running power to anything for this pool, right? And that may dictate whether or not you do it. Now, if I do have something else like a heat pump system, and maybe I'm running a branch circuit over for the ignition or whatever, and I've run an equipment ground to it, and that connects to that equipment, then it's going to be bonded to the metal frame, and I've already bonded that to the equipotential bonding grid. Then at the motor, then I don't have to connect that 8 gauge to the equipment ground at the motor. I can just curl up that 8 and be done with it. Why? Because it's already connected somewhere else intimately to the systems. You get what I'm saying? Hopefully you get what I'm saying. If not, I did a podcast on it. Go check it out. Again, if I'm not conveying it right, I'm sure Mike Holt or somebody else, Ryan Jackson, I'm sure somebody else will convey it much better than me. But that's what I'm trying to convey. Okay. And I don't really have an image for it, so sorry. Okay. All right, so, and then the other one is a pool water heater. It says, for pool water heaters rated at more than 50 amperes and having specific instructions regarding bonding and grounding, it says only those parts designated to be bonded shall be bonded, and only those parts designated to be grounded shall be grounded. So if you're dealing with a pool water heater, then just follow the instructions from the manufacturer, and where it tells you to bond, you bond. Where it tells you to connect the equipment ground, because you may have separation there due to a dielectric separation in the water heater. Okay, so just follow the instructions from the manufacturer. Again, special instructions will be usually given from that manufacturer. All right. Lastly, in this one is fixed metal parts. Okay, so let's look at fixed metal parts. So what does that mean? So fixed metal parts could be anything around your pool that are fixed in place. Okay, not something that you can wheel up and wheel away. Fixed metal parts. Okay, it says all fixed metal parts, including but are not limited to. So this is not an all-inclusive list, by the way, around your pool. It says metal sheath cables. That could be like an MC that's running up the side of the building or whatnot. That type. It's still metal sheath, even though it's PVC jacketed probably. It's still metal sheath cable. So again, very loosely used. Any raceways that may be running up the side of a building, again, based on proximity. Any metal piping of any type. It could be the metal piping that is supplying the antenna for a antenna on the roof. Whatever it may be, it's metal piping's very broad. Metal awnings, believe it or not. If you have a metal awning, you're going to have to bond the frame of that metal awning. You're going to have to get creative to figure how you do this. What about metal fence? Well, you have to bond the metal fence. Now, this ends up being a big argument with people. How the hell do you bond the metal fence if you're bonding the piping, let's say, that supports the metal fence or the post, and then you have the metal fence? Do you have to do it at one location? Do you have to do it at every pole that's within 5 feet? You know, this can be get complex for people. And I've seen AHJs make you actually have to bond each strand of a metal fence. I've actually seen them do that, okay? Also, metal doors, and this can be kind of weird. And how you're going to do the metal door, because it's the portion that swings, probably not good, but you could have metal sliding door, and you could connect to the fixed portion maybe. And then window frames. But this is a not all-inclusive list. So I can see an AHJ seeing something else that is fixed metal, okay? Now, of these things, okay, it says they shall be bonded where located no greater than either of the following. Okay, so of these things, and this is not an all-inclusive list, by the way, so you'll need to work with your AHJ, 5 feet horizontally from the inside wall of the pool. So any fixed metal parts that are located within 5 feet of the inside wall of the pool has got to be bonded to the equipotential bonding grid. Yep. Also, okay, either of the following. Also, you could have maybe, obviously, this is horizontal requirement. Then here's the vertical. It says 12 feet measured above the maximum water level. Again, that's the part where it's going to spill out of the pool. Okay, 12 feet vertically above the maximum water level of the pool, observation stand, tower, or platform, or diving structure. Okay, so 12 feet vertically above the maximum water line for above the pool, all these things. Okay, so that encompasses a lot of area. Okay, exception. It says those separated, and that's any of this equipment, any of these metal parts right here, those separated from the pool by a permanent barrier that prevents contact by a person shall not be required to be bonded. Okay, so that means that I could have one of these, a fence, right? Now this is a stupid example, but I could have a fence here, and I could have a block wall or a wooden fence that separates between the metal fence and, you know, and of course that one is within 5 feet, but the metal fence could be within 5 feet. But if I have another fence there and that is a permanent barrier, then it's okay. Then the metal fence can be within 5 feet and not have to be bonded because I have a barrier in the way. Okay, that's just one example. Let's see here. I was just hoping that there would be another image other than this one. It's not a great image. So anyway, commentary, always nice to read. It says the metal parts required to be bonded include all metal parts of electrical equipment associated with the water circulating system of the pool, all metal parts of the pool structure, and all fixed metal parts within 5 feet of the inside wall of the pool and not separated by a permanent barrier. The bonding of these parts can be accomplished by more than one of the following methods using solid 8 gauge or larger if you want. I make wiring cables, so if you want to go larger, hey, knock yourself out. Copper conductor that is insulated, covered, or bare. Remember, we're not talking about the grid. We're talking about interconnecting all these things. So the perimeter and the grids that we make, they have to be bare because they're making up the grid. The interconnections of all these things, that does not have to be bare. It can be bare, but it could be insulated. It doesn't have to be because you're just connecting pieces together, okay? So again, that's another distinct difference that people have. They'll see, I've seen inspectors say the pool grid, they'll put in, let's say, the perimeter grid, and they'll connect it to the conductive pool shell, and then they'll have a motor, and then they'll run an insulated, for whatever reason, an insulated black all the way over 8 gauge, all the way over to the motor, and an inspector will turn them down. And they'll go, no, that needs to be bare 8. That is not true. That is a jumper that's connecting components to the equipotential bonding grid, okay? That's it. That conductor is just putting it at the same potential, okay? It is not required to be bare, okay? It could be, okay? You're buying enough bare anyway, might as well go full bore, but It doesn't have to be. That's something that I like to get people to take away. Okay. Let's see. The bonding of these parts can be accomplished by one or more. Okay, so we can be connecting the parts directly to each other in series or in parallel configurations. So I could just be looping these things together, right? Y'all saw that picture I showed you earlier, right? Let's see here. Let me see if I can show that picture right here. I could be connecting all of these and looping through them, or I can do them in parallel and I can run from let's say the equipotential bonding grid, and I can connect out with these jumpers to all these different things. Either way is fine. If I want to loop it through everything, that's fine. If I want to connect it out like a star pattern, that type of thing, parallel, that's fine as well. I've got many options that I can do here, okay? That type of scenario. Okay, it's up to you. Also, it would go without saying, again, this is just commentary, but it says the connection of the parts of the unencapsulated structural metal form of the shell. Again, this is typically connecting with wires and steel ties and things like that. Connecting the parts of the pool shell constructed of bolts, welded steel as the common connection points. They'll typically take the rebar and connect it with steel tie wires. Here, connecting the parts of the perimeter bonded grid consisting of either the structural metal, okay, whether it's rebar or welded mesh, or a solid 8 copper, if you have that allowance, that's encircling the perimeter, okay? If you're doing that, I can pretty much use any connector that is listed for grounding and bonding in that application. And direct burial, I wouldn't have any problem with that type of thing, okay? All right. Lastly, on today's episode, we're going to talk about the pool water, okay? The bonding or the concept of the pool water, and what you have to do with the pool water, okay? All right, so let's get back here to the lesson, and I'll just read this to you. We're almost at the end, folks. All right, pool water. 680.26c says pool water contains dissolved chemicals that are conductive to some extent. Some pools are made of fiberglass, non-conductive, and some have insulating vinyl liners. Both of those would be non-conductive, right? And let's see if I can zoom in a little bit better on this for you guys. There, okay? Now, it says where there is no metal parts in contact with the water, there still is a need to bond the water to the perimeter decking or the perimeter equipotential bonding grid, okay? So, or to the equipotential bonding grid in itself, okay? Still required. Again, this is to help reduce voltage gradients between the pool water and the perimeter decking, okay? For this situation, we cover 680.26c, and this is exactly how it reads in the NEC. So we'll stick here. It says, pool water. Says where none of the bonding parts is specified in 680.26b1 through b7 are in direct contact with the pool water. It says the pool water shall be in direct contact with an approved corrosive resistant conductive surface that exposes not less than 9 square inches of surface area to the pool water at all times. At all times. Okay? So it says the conductive surface shall be located where it is not exposed to physical damage or dislodgement during usual pool activities. Means you can't just knock it loose or something like that. And it shall be bonded in accordance with 680.26. So that means it just has to be bonded to what? The equipotential bonding grid. Okay, so that pool water has to be bonded. All right. Now, the commentary ends up being the best one to show for this, because right here it says that bonding, such as ladders, rails, underwater luminaires, typically has enough surface area on it. You remember that luminaire wet niche is being connected to the equipotential bonding grid? So that is in direct contact with the water. And it typically would provide the required surface area. It is not necessary to provide another conductive element. Here is one that people miss all the time. I have seen inspectors, okay, you with me? Check this out. I have seen inspectors require you to bond the pool water even when I had a conductive pool shell. Means I had the concrete and the rebar, and it is a conductive pool shell. It met the requirements of 680.26b1. It's a conductive pool shell. Obviously not vinyl pool and obviously not fiberglass. But it's concrete. It's got rebar. If it's got supporting steel, it's a conductive pool shell. Well, guess what? That does bond the water. So I don't have to do anything else. I have had inspectors say, oh, I need you to put some other ancillary component to bond that water. And my response to that is, I do not need to do that if I've got a conductive pool shell. Now, I do need to do that if I've got a non-conductive pool shell, but I may be able to use a ladder that goes down into the water. I may be able to use the niche that goes into the water if it has enough surface area and it's connected. I may be able to do that. Or I can buy separate devices that might mount in the circulating system of the water. It might mount in the skimmer and down near the bottom of the skimmer where it's always below the low level of the skimmer. I have other options, right? But don't tell me that I've got to bond the pool water if it's a conductive pool shell. It's already bonded. I don't have to do anything else. It's done. It is connected with the pool water because we've already determined that whether it's plaster, whether it's painted, whether it's sprayed on, whether it's block, that it is considered a conductive pool shell. If that's the case, it is in contact with the water. In fact, there's a hell of a lot of surface area, way more than 9 square inches. So again, anybody that makes you put something additional to it, no. Fight back. Fight back. Now, if I got a fiberglass pool and I got a fiberglass ladder, right? And typically I might have, I'm just saying, usually those are going to have a situation where they have, let's say, some type of no niche or a through the wall niche, okay, or something like that. Then they might sit there and say, oh, I need something extra. Or the luminaire is a total non-metallic, it's all plastic and everything like that. They may say, I want something extra to bond this water. Well, that makes sense. And they do make listed products that you can use to bond the water, okay? And people say, how in the world do I bond the water? I say, you just put a lug on it. That's all. All right, folks, that's a lot of info. I don't expect you to take it all. I only covered the surface of it. Obviously, we can get much deeper than this, but I just wanted to give you the knowledge to be able to go out there and be informed if you're dealing with swimming pools, if you're dealing with the equipotential bonding grid. I am probably going to shift gears and move on to other than storable pools. I'm probably going to save that for you to go watch the 8-part series that we have over on Fast Tracks Tube. So I'm not going to get into stored pools, except to tell you that the stored pool does not require the equipotential bonding grid if it's truly a storable pool. Okay? Just make that clear. All right? All right, so let's see here. If there's anything that I want to tell you before I leave. No, we will be doing a separate episode, though, on part 4 for hot tubs, spas, and everything. And that probably I will probably do that tomorrow. So I'm going to cover hot tubs, spas, self-contained spas and hot tubs, permanently installed immersion pools. That's going to be tomorrow, but that's probably where I'm going to stop. Okay, it's that tomorrow. And then we're going to shift gears back into some exam prep and do a little something extra. So, because again, I'm sure that y'all are bored with pools, spas, and hot tubs, or all this type of topic. So, all right, so let's real quick, let's do some drawings. And we're only going to do a couple because again, that's the, oops, that's the, no, that don't count. The sacrifice that we have to make when I go a long time is you sacrifice the number of giveaways. Okay, it's a trade-off, folks. All right, so let's go on and do this and do some giveaways real quick. I'm surprised that there's still 32 of you here, 2 hours, almost 3 hours into it. I'm so surprised because I'm doing myself. T-A. God, that's a long name. I'm sure I'm not going to get it right. You see who you are. You're registered for the drawing for TradeHog. Okay. So that is a artificial intelligence tool we use to help us find things or explain things in the field as a contractor or as an electrician, plumber, mechanical, whatever. That's TradeHog. You can try it out for free. Go to tradehog.net, .com, or .org. It really doesn't matter. All right, let's go to the next one. It looks like that's Estronada. I don't know if I'm saying that right. That looks like Estronada 324. Boy, I don't know if this is a pattern for when you pick one, what this thing's going to do, but there you go. You're also registered for TradeHog. 12-month basic subscription. All right. The drawings on June 12th. No lunch for me. Yeah, no lunch today. Certainly no lunch. Adrian Guerrero, you want a wire waffle. All you got to do is send me your mailing address and we will send you a wire waffle. Get up to 16, 14 twos, 16, 12 twos through here. It helps the issue of the violation of 312.5C where you can't bring all those cables through one TA or single knockout. This kind of makes that, kind of compliant, right? Okay. All right, so just send me your address and let me know you won the wire waffle. Okay. Rob says it helped you out. There you go. Is that TradeHog helped you out or today's episode helped you? We didn't go too deep. All right, we're going to spin this again. Because it didn't, this is for another wire waffle. I'm seeing a pattern here for this wheel. All right, Rob. You won a wire waffle. And I know you've sent your address to me before, but again, do it again. Remind me. That way I don't have to go looking through it. Every time I get those emails for giveaways, I send them off to Jeff. And Jeff is behind because he's having an issue. So he's a little slacking a little bit. We were caught up. We got all the courses out. We got some of the other stuff out. And then all of a sudden he got sick. So we have hit a slop again. So I don't think he gave me why I was sick. I'm sure he didn't give it to me. So anyway, all right. All right, folks, that's it. I kept you for nearly 3 hours today. I apologize for keeping you so long. But again, we did a 30,000-foot view. We could have gone deeper into pools and in these little elements. We could deep dive. I'm trying my darndest to keep it up at a high level because I do want you to go read it. I do want you to go look it up. And if you have any questions, you're more than happy to send them to me at paulabernathy.com. I will deep dive into anything specific. But I really wanted to give you just a 1,000-foot view, 30,000-foot view or whatnot of pools, permanently installed pools and all that. So that's what we did in the last couple of days. All right. All right, folks, till next time, stay safe. God bless. And we'll catch you tomorrow where we're going to knock out hot tub spas in permanently installed hot tubs, not storable. I tend to don't talk about the storable stuff, that type of thing. Okay. All right. We'll see you tomorrow. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.